Okay, before this video begins, I should probably address if this is even a valid subject. As I stated in my request video, superpowers and anthropomorph, anthropom, anthro-animals do not count to make something a monster. So, why am I even talking about Pokemon then? Well, it's for two simple reasons. Number one, Pokemon are unique creatures. See, the reason someone like Sonic the Hedgehog wouldn't count for this series is because, well, Sonic's a hedgehog, which is an identifiable creature that exists in our real life, therefore not a monster. However, all Pokemon are unique species, and while they are based on real animals, they're still their own species that exist separately from them. So, therefore, valid. And secondly, Pokemon is literally short for pocket monsters. So if even the creators see them as monsters, then I'd say that's a pretty dang good argument. Alright, enough semantics, enjoy the video. Can't go wrong with Kanto. Ah, Pokemon. What started out as a weird experimental Game Boy game has turned into the largest franchise in the entire world. Oh, and that's not even a joke, by the way. Pokemon literally holds the record for highest grossing franchise of all time. In a nutshell, Pokemon is an RPG, but instead of party members like most games of the genre, Pokemon instead allows you to capture the monsters and use them to build a team. It started in 1996 and has been going strong ever since. Games, a long-running anime series, several mangas, movies, and of course, mountains of merchandise, with no sign of slowing down anytime soon. As for what I personally think of the series, well, this is going to be a weird question, but have you ever had a piece of media that you vibe with in regards to basically everything about it, except for the actual piece of media? Yeah, weird question, I know, but that's how I feel about Pokemon. I love the creatures, I find the lore fascinating, I like hearing people talk about it, but as for the games themselves, I don't really enjoy playing them. This is mostly because, in general, I don't really like traditional RPGs, and also because I kind of have completionist brain, therefore I refuse to put a game down until I have everything in it. And that's kind of difficult with Pokemon, considering how not only is it impossible to catch every Pokemon in a single game, but nowadays, you literally can't get all the Pokemon, so the games just kinda drive me nuts since I know I'll never be able to complete them fully. But enough about me. Let's just get to the main topic of this video, the Pokemon themselves. As of now, there are literally over 1,000 of these guys, and I'm going to talk about every single one of them. I'll be discussing their inspiration, their lore, their different forms, etc., etc. Why am I doing this to myself? Who hurt me? As you can imagine, this is quite the project, and as you can tell by the title of this video, I split the series into 9 parts, each covering a different generation. And then at the end, I'll probably just combine them all into one giant video. Sounds good? Good. Okay. But before we can get into specific Pokemon, I feel like we should have a little bit of a glossary section, so that way more casual fans or people not familiar with the series won't get confused by the terminology used in this series. If you already know all this stuff, then just skip to whatever time I end up editing into this video. Okay? Okay. Evolution. In Pokemon, doing certain things with certain Pokemon will cause them to become a more powerful form, in a process known as evolving. This is different from real evolution in two major ways. For one, it happens on an individual level, and two, it's not a permanent species change. As when two fully evolved Pokemon breed, the offspring is their least evolved form, whereas if this was like real evolution, the offspring would still be the fully evolved form. Anyways, there are many ways that Pokemon evolve, with some even having unique methods, which I'll be highlighting when I get to them. However, some general methods include leveling up. Basically, the more Pokemon fight, the more experience they get. The more experience they get, the more they level up. The more they level up, then most Pokemon will evolve. Simple as that. This is the most common form. Stones. In Pokemon, there are several stones with elemental properties, and when exposed to certain Pokemon, they'll cause them to evolve. Simple as that. Trading. In the games, you're able to send your Pokemon to your friends in exchange for their Pokemon, and some Pokemon will actually evolve when traded. Now, as far as I can tell, there's never been an in-universe explanation for why this happens. It pretty much just seems to exist to entice you to trade. Trading with an item. Same as the above, but the Pokemon has to be holding a certain item in order to evolve. Happiness. Some Pokemon won't evolve until you become friends with them. And finally, areas. Some Pokemon only evolve when they're in certain areas that have properties related to their evolution. So yeah, that's all the major ones. Mega Evolution slash Gigantamax. Basically, these are like evolutions except they're temporary, either wearing off after a battle or after a certain amount of turns. Mega Evolutions are only used by fully evolved Pokemon, but Gigantamax can be used even by certain unevolved Pokemon. Regional forms. Well, we've already established that the in-game evolution isn't really evolution. This franchise actually does showcase an example of more realistic evolution with regional forms. Basically, in some regions of the planet the games are set in, certain Pokemon have evolved certain traits to better fit in their non-native environment, often gaining new types and in some cases, even gaining new evolutions. Now, the reason I call this real evolution is because it is a permanent change. So, no matter how much you breed regional forms, you will never get a form from another region. So, therefore, it is a permanent change, unlike regular evolution, which isn't a permanent change to the species. But I already talked about this. Why am I still talking? I don't know. Shiny. All Pokemon have an alternate palette called a shiny form. It changes the Pokemon's color, and when in battle, it'll cause them to sparkle. Starter. In every Pokemon game, you're given the choice of 3 different Pokemon to start out with each one being either a water, grass, or fire type. Fossil Pokemon. Some Pokemon are actually extinct, and the only way to get them is to pull a Jurassic Park. When we get to these guys, I'll have a picture of the fossil they're revived from in the upper left corner, so that way you'll know that they're a fossil. Paradox. In Gen 9, we were introduced to displaced in time Pokemon that are either the ancestors of modern Pokemon or futuristic versions of them. Legendary slash mythical. Now, some Pokemon are easier than others to catch, and these guys are no exceptions. Unlike the other Pokemon, which are often found through random encounters, legendary Pokemon are found in fixed locations and have to actively be challenged in order to fight them. Meanwhile, mythical Pokemon usually aren't even in the game and are instead given out through real world events. Now, with legendary Pokemon, there's a lot of confusion over whether or not they're a species or not. Some are undoubtedly unique specimens due to either having concrete backstories or because they're basically gods. Others, however, do seem to be a species because we see more than one of them, and some of them are even capable of reproducing. So, these kind of muddy the waters as to what exactly qualifies as legendary in universe. Now that we've got most of the terms out of the way, let's give a brief rundown on different types and what makes a Pokemon that type. Normal. Basically the catch-all type. If you lack extraordinary qualities or your power doesn't really fit anywhere else, this is where you are. Although when it comes to normal dual types, it can be pretty vague as to where the normal comes from there. Fire. Pokemon that have control over flames. Pretty self-explanatory. Water. Hydrokinetic Pokemon, mostly based on aquatic life. Grass. Pokemon based on plants that often have control over plants and other stuff like that. Also a lot of fungus because in most media there's no difference between plants and fungi, but whatever. Electric. Pokemon that have a certain spark to them, if you catch my drift. Rock. Pokemon of geological capabilities. Ground. Pokemon of geological capabilities but more dirt-based? Yeah, I have no idea why these are 2 different types either. Flying. Pokemon that can either fly or have control over the air. Here ones are rather rare. Hey, that rhymed. Ice. Pokemon with powers over the cold, often based on polar animals. Fighting. Pokemon with an itch for a combat, usually based on different fighting styles. Poison. Exactly what it sounds like. These Pokemon are full of deadly toxins. Psychic. Pokemon that specialize in mental attacks, and often have telekinesis. Several of them are quite intelligent. Bug. Pokemon based on arthropods. Ghost. Pokemon that are either spirits or just ghoulish in some way. Dragon. Pokemon that have draconic qualities, infamous for what is and isn't part of this type. Steel. Pokemon either made of metal or associated with metal. Dark. Pokemon with black hearts, often associated with evil. Fairy, Pokemon of quality similar to the mythical creature. Wow, that took a lot longer than I thought it would. Okay, so now that we're all hopefully caught up, let's finally get into dissecting different Pokemon, starting with the families introduced in Generation 1. As the first generation, there are a few quirks of the earliest batch of Pokemon. For one, while a lot of later Pokemon have pretty clear origins, most of the Gen 1 guys are pretty vague in this regard, with several of them not really having good real-life equivalents. In fact, a lot of the Pokemon in this generation look more like they belong in a Godzilla film. So as such, the origins of a lot of these guys will mostly be guesswork based on context clues. Secondly, there is no real theme of this generation's Pokemon. As we go on, you might notice that the Pokemon of future generations more often than not seem to follow a certain theme in terms of design or origin, which I'll point out when we get to them. But here, since it was the first games, there is no real unifying design theme. Okay, I've delayed it long enough. By the way, I promise this won't happen in later videos, this one just had a lot of clarifying to do. So let's finally get into these guys. All 151 Pokemon of Gen 1, and their relatives in later generations, so it's a lot more than that. Anyway, here we go! Starting off, we have the delightful plant, frog things. Yeah, as I said, a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon have pretty vague origins, and we literally start out with one of them. Origins aside, this is Bulbasaur, the grass starter of Gen 1. Notable for being one of only two starters to be dual type in their first stage. In this case, they're also part poison type. At level 16, Bulbasaur evolves into Ivysaur, now possessing full leaves and a flower bud. And at level 32, Ivysaur becomes Venusaur, now fully bloomed with a Rafflesia. Although apparently it actually smells good according to the Pokedex, and it can even calm nerves. Venusaurs also have sexual dimorphism, with the females possessing a weird seed pod-like thing in their flower, which is presumably for reproductive reasons. In addition, Venusaur both possesses a Mega Evolution and a G-Max form, both of which further blooms its flower, so yeah, that's a thing. Notably, it's been mentioned in a few Pokedex entries that this line is capable of both animal-style feeding as well as feeding by photosynthesis like plants do, which is pretty cool. Really helps them feel like animal-plant hybrids. That's something that I feel like a lot of other grass types don't have, so it's cool to see it here. Ah, the ever-iconic Charmander line. These flame-breathing lizards are debatably the second most iconic Pokemon behind the series mascot Pikachu. Charmander is the fire starter at Gen 1, and at level 16 it becomes Charmeleon, gaining a red color and a head crest. Charmeleon are described as being aggressive and always itching for a fight. So basically, they do not have the best adolescent years. At level 36, Charmeleon turns into Charizard, gaining another head crest and more importantly wings. In this form, Charizard goes from pure fire to fire flying. Yeah, it's been pointed out for years, despite its very draconic appearance, Charizard is not dragon type, which is the first of many examples of the weird standards for what is and isn't a dragon in this series. Anyways, Charizard also got not one, but two Mega Evolutions, with Mega Charizard X even becoming a dragon type. Oh yeah, it also has a G-Max, so there's that. According to the Pokedex, Charizard's flames can melt literally anything. Although this is not reflected in gameplay, as Charizard is no more effective against rock or ground types than any other fire Pokemon. Also, it's mentioned that while they still like to fight, they refuse to fight anything weaker than them. Again, this is purely for the dex, because imagine having a Pokemon that you literally couldn't use against anything of a lower level than it. I don't think anyone would want that Pokemon. Oh yeah, one common misconception I need to debunk is in regards to their tail. See, most Pokemon fans believe that if the flame on their tail goes out, then they will die. However, this is not true. In the games, it's consistently mentioned that the tail is a symbol of their health. So if anything, it's the fire that goes out when they die and not the other way around. This misconception stems from the anime where this was treated as a rule at first. However, both later episodes and other adaptations would show Charizards getting completely submerged and their tail is still going. So yeah, myth busted. Oh crap, wrong busting theme song. Our tiny turtle Pokemon Squirtle is the third and final Kanto starter, notable for being the only Gen 1 starter to remain single type its entire life, being water all the way. The level 16 Squirtle evolves into War Turtle, gaining a pair of wings on its head that apparently help it swim faster, as well as a fluffy tail that is both an oxygen bubble and apparently it changes color with age. Oh yeah, I should probably address that, shouldn't I? While it's often thought that Pokemon evolutions are their equivalent to aging, there are times in the franchise that refute this. For example, several of War Turtle's Dex entries mention that it specifically lives 10,000 years, without mention of this is true of the other two forms. So whether evolution is aging or not is pretty debatable. Maybe evolving is like a trade-off for more power, but in exchange for a shorter lifespan. Wow, that's kind of depressing actually. Anyways, level 36 War Turtle evolves into Blastoise, the shellfish Pokemon. Losing their wings and their long tails, Blastoise gains two cannons in their shoulder, which are said to be able to accurately shoot over 160 feet away with enough strength to puncture metal. Although again, this is not reflected in gameplay, as they don't do any more damage to steel types than other water types, but whatever. And then when Blastoise Mega evolves, not only do its cannons move to its arms, allowing for more mobility with its aim, they decided to give it a third cannon, because sure, let's make this thing even more dangerous. Oh, by the way, this line is canonically carnivores, so just know that they would eat you if they could. And don't forget about its G-Max form, where its back gets coated in cannons. Yeah, this thing is genuinely terrifying. Yeah, I know Charizard can melt anything and it's a scary dragon, but at least it's mentioned they have a code of honor. We're given no reassurance for these guys. And that is why Blastoise is scarier than Charizard. Prove me wrong. The Caterpie line is a short and simple one that primarily exists to introduce the concept of evolution, as this line fully evolves by level 10. Caterpie is a caterpillar with a red horn on its head, similar to swallowtail caterpillars. Then at level 7 it pupates and becomes the cocoon Pokemon Metapod, which canonically cannot eat until it hatches, again making you question if evolution is connected to aging or not, because this is pretty good evidence for the aging side. Questions aside, I always loved how Metapod looks disappointed in you. It just looks pretty funny. Anyway, at level 10, Metapod hatches into Butterfree, the butterfly Pokemon. Despite its rather harmless appearance, Butterfree is described as having poisonous covered wings that get kicked up when they flap them, with the deck straight up saying not to breathe in one near one that's flying. They have a diet of nectar, and in some regions they have a rivalry with fellow nectar-eating bug Cutiefly over territory. Which, I don't know why, it's just funny imagining gang wars between a butterfly and a bee fly. That's just funny. Butterfrees also have sexual dimorphism, with females having black patches on their lower wings. Also, they have a Gigantamax form, so there's that. Often seen as a counterpoint to the Butterfree, the Weedle line has the same evolutionary cycle, but unlike Butterfree, which is based more around ranged attacks, this line is more associated with up-close physical attacks. Also, they're poison types. Anyway, Weedle is a larva with a large nose and venomous stingers on each end of its body. At level 7, it pupates into Kakuna, aka the cooler Metapod. There's really no difference between them besides their moves, but Kakuna just looks cooler, and that's an objective fact. At level 10, Kakuna hatches into Beedrills, who is more likely a wasp because 1, it's never described as making honey, 2, it's described as predatory, and 3, it just looks more like a wasp than a bee. Beedrill has 3 stingers for injecting venom and is described as attacking in massive swarms to anything that gets near their nest. So yeah, that's lovely. Oh, and then we get Mega Beedrill, whose legs get replaced by more stingers, allowing for even more venom injection. I'm starting to think that living in the Pokemon world would be a bad thing. The thought just came to me. The Pidgey line represents a reoccurring element in Pokemon, the early route bird. See, in most generations, there's a bird-like Pokemon found in the first few areas with similar evolution rates to starters, and most of them have 3 stages, with only a few exceptions. The Pidgey line's evolutions are notable for the fact that, all things considered, they don't really change much. The only real differences between them are size and the fact that they get a large mohawk that grows as they age, so yeah. Now, despite their name, these guys don't really have anything to do with pigeons, having more in common with birds of prey. At the Pidgey stage, they're described as being docile, preferring to flee rather than fight. They're also portrayed as being predators of bug-type Pokemon, which is nice. At level 18, Pidgey evolves into Pidgeotto. Unlike the docile Pidgey, Pidgeotto is said to be very territorial, attacking anything entering its territory that it deems a threat. Also, unlike the bug-eater Pidgey, Pidgeotto is described as being a true bird of prey. While it's never specified what specifically it eats, some spin-off material show them as predators of the fish Pokemon Magikarp. So yeah, at level 36 becomes Pidgeot. Considering that its territory is never mentioned in Pokedex entries, it can be assumed they lose their territorial edge when they mature. They're also described as being capable of flying at Mach 2 speed, which is faster than the speed of sound. There's also Mega Pidgeot, which is said to be capable of flying for 2 weeks straight without breaks. So yeah, pretty broken. At least lore-wise, not stat-wise. Unlike Pidgeotto, which is pretty vague about what its prey is, Pidgeot is explicitly referred to as being a predator of Magikarp, so yeah. Like I said, these guys are not pigeons, these are birds of prey, with their piscivorous diet making them similar to ospreys. So there's that. The Rattata line presents us with two things. First is the fact that they're the first two-stage evolution in the Dex, and they're the first Pokemon in the Dex with regional forms. Starting with their Kanto form, Rattata is a purple rat with an extreme appetite. Dex entries always go on about how they'll eat anything. They're also said to be a very adaptable species that breeds like rabbits. Yeah, I know that in a previous video I accidentally used the term breeding like rats, but I accidentally forgot what the saying goes, so yeah, sorry. At level 20, they evolve into Raticate, a fat brown rat that's even more versatile. It has webbed feet so it can swim, chew through concrete, and is said to be very aggressive. Uh, Actually, now that I think about it, these guys are literally just rats. And people give the new games crap for making Pokemon that are just animals. What do you call this? Also, this line is dimorphism, where the females have shorter whiskers than the males. I'm not sure why that's the way it is, but that's just how they work, I guess. In the Alola regions, Rattatas were accidentally introduced and became a pest. In order to counteract this, the locals decided to import the Pokemon Yangoose in order to hunt them. Faced with new competition, the Rattata ended up evolving into nocturnal animals that ended up gaining the Dark type. They've also formed gangs led by Raticates that often get into turf wars and have become much pickier, only eating fresh food. In fact, because of this, restaurants that are frequented by them are considered good, unlike in real life where a restaurant frequented by rats is considered bad. Also, they don't have dimorphism in this form, further proving to me how pointless their mainland dimorphism is. Spearoline can best be described as a grumpy version of the Pidgeys. Resembling a mutant sparrow, they're often described as being territorial and predators of bugs. In addition, they're said to not be able to fly very high, but they can fly very fast and have a very loud, annoying call used to drive larger Pokemon out of its territory. At level 20, they evolve into the crane-like Fearow, whose long beak is able to hunt Pokemon in both water and in burrows. They also have good stamina, being able to stay in the air for an entire day. Unfortunately, this is one of those lines that doesn't really have much to talk about. They don't really have that much lore. Their Pokedex entries are pretty generic, so this is where it ends. So, yeah. Sorry to any Spearow fans out there, but they don't have much to talk about. Ekans is a purple rattlesnake whose name is literally snake spelled backwards. Ekans is described as an egg eater, and according to the Dex, Ekans have no poison when they're born. Now, this is actually the opposite of how real venomous snakes work, since baby snakes are a lot more dangerous than adult snakes when you get bitten by them, since they have no control over how much venom they inject. So yeah, word of advice, don't get bitten by baby snakes. Also, Ekans being a rattlesnake is pretty arbitrary. The rattle's never mentioned in any Pokedex entries, and none of the moves it learns seems to use it. So, maybe it's like a real rattlesnake, and it's a way to warn larger creatures that it's near, but that's just a theory. At level 22, Snake backwards evolves into Cobra with a K backwards, Arbok. And as stated, Arbok is a cobra, and it lost its seemingly pointless rattle in exchange for scary marking on its neck that paralyzes prey with fear. In addition to its powerful venom, Arbok is described as being a very powerful constrictor, capable of even crushing steel. Which again isn't shown in gameplay since Constrict is a normal move and doesn't do much damage to steel types, but whatever. And much like Komodo dragons, Arbok are very persistent with their prey, refusing to stop chasing them until they're dead. So yeah, very deadly snakes. Now here's a Pokemon everybody knows. It's Pikachu. Easily the most famous Pokemon, Pikachu is not only the most famous Pokemon, but is also one of the most famous characters in video game history. This furry yellow rodent-esque creature. Okay, let's talk about what Pikachu is. A common misconception in the fandom is that Pikachu is based on the Lagomorph known as a Pika. However, this has been debunked by the developers, who said that the Pika part of the name comes from the Japanese onomatopoeia for spark. You know, but because he's electric. Whatever. Anyway, they've said that Pikachu's design is primarily based on squirrels, so that's what I'm going with for this video. Now, with Pikachu, this also brings us to the introduction of baby Pokemon. See, in Generation 2, breeding was introduced, and I guess as an incentive to try it out, they gave a bunch of Gen 1 Pokemon pre-evolved forms. That's my only theory as to why baby Pokemon are a thing, because otherwise, these guys are the definition of filler. They're pretty much the same as other first stage Pokemon, but they can't breed and have terrible stats. Also, most of them evolve with friendship, such as is the case with the baby Pikachu, Pichu. By the way, if you're wondering why I wrote Pikachu instead of Pichu, it's because I titled the lines after the first evolution you can encounter in the games. So since Pichu was introduced after Pikachu, Pikachu is the first obtainable member of the party, so that's why I'm calling it that way. Anyway, Pichu is often described as being unable to use electricity without hurting itself, which is reflected in both the anime and its appearance in the Smash Bros. Games, but thankfully, in-game, this isn't the case. As stated earlier, at high friendship, Pichu evolve into the famous Pikachu. Pikachu are described as being very intelligent and social, with them even resuscitating their unconscious brethren with their electricity. Pikachu's rosy red cheeks are actually where its electricity is stored, and it's been shown that touching them will zap you. When exposed to a Thunderstone, Pikachu will evolve into Raichu, aka the Pokemon that I'm 95% sure they regret creating, considering how common it is for there to be scenarios where they incentivize you to keep your Pikachu from evolving. In fact, even in universe, it's stated that people rarely ever evolve to Raichu. So yeah, I'm pretty sure if they had the ability to retcon a Pokemon out of existence, they would probably do this for Raichu in a heartbeat. Anyway, as for the Pokemon itself, they're described as having very powerful electricity, with it being stated to reach 100,000 volts, enough to faint an Indian elephant. That's not a joke, by the way, that's literally what the Pokedex says. I think the reason this became such a joke within the fandom is because 1, it's just a casual reference to a real animal, and 2, the fact they had to specify Indian elephants. So it's like, yeah, I can knock out an Indian elephant, but an African elephant, kind of a gray area. Hilariously enough, though, we did later get an actual Indian elephant Pokemon, which was Steel type, meaning it's weak to electric attacks. Anyway, Raichu are described as being very temperamental when they store a lot of electricity in their cheeks, which is said to be the result of stress from all the sparks, so can you really blame them? Now, as stated earlier, Raichu is always given the short end of the stick when it comes to stuff, but it was finally thrown a bone when it was given in Alolan form. In Alola, Raichus have gained the Psychic type and developed a more Surfer-esque personality. As for why they become psychic, well, even in-universe that's stated to be a mystery, but it's theorized to be related to pancakes. I will not elaborate. But this is literally all Raichu has gotten in terms of variants. You wanna know what Pikachu got? Well, first off, we got Cosplay Pikachu, where specially bred Pikachu can wear costumes. And no, this isn't just an outfit, each costume gives him a new move. Then we got Hat Pikachu, which is Pikachu wearing the hat of the anime's main character, Ash. Again, this isn't just a costume, they have unique stats, and a new super move. And Pikachu is one of only 3 Pokemon to not be fully evolved that can use G-Max. So yeah, they really do not want you to evolve into Raichu. Oh yeah, there was also spiky-eared Pichu for one game. It's Pichu with spikes on its ear tufts. It can't evolve, it can't be traded or transferred to other games, and its stats aren't that much better than the terrible Pichu stats. What is the point of this thing? Oh yeah, Pikachu and Raichu also have sexual dimorphism. Female Pikachus have a heart-shaped tail, and female Raichu are missing the tips of their tail. So yeah, that's a thing. So yeah, Stan Raichu. Sandshrew is not a shrew, but rather a pangolin. Yeah, this subterranean species lives in arid deserts due to its hatred of water, which, considering that it's weak to water, makes sense. They're also said to be very durable, since as long as its shell is what's hit, then it will survive. Oh yeah, they can also roll up into a ball. At level 22, they evolve into Sandslash, gaining a spiny hide and long, sharp claws. Sandslash is capable of digging through the ground at incredible speeds, and as another defense mechanism, it's capable of running pretty fast while kicking up dust in order to blind their enemy. Other than that, yeah, they usually just roll around again. In Alola, due to being forced out of their natural habitat due to volcanic eruption, the Sandshrew population migrated to colder mountain areas, where they ended up evolving into Ice-Steel types, now covered in ice as hard as steel. Also, they now evolve by stone instead of level up. Anyways, these guys can't curl up anymore, but luckily, now they're able to slide across the ground at incredibly fast speeds, letting them outrun potential predators. and Sandslash's claws are now useful at scaling icy surfaces. So yeah, I'd say this is a pretty cool adaptation, pun not intended. Although since it lives in snow now, that would make it Snowshrew. Alright, these guys require some context. See, in Generation 1, Pokemon didn't have genders, with one exception. For some reason, they decided to give these guys genders. But because no other Pokemon had genders, they were classified as if they were different species. And because making them one line would throw off the number count, they're still separate even after all this time. Anyways, this group of hamster, rhino, kaiju things, like I said, very vague, are a family that has two different evolutionary lines depending on their gender. Males are purple and have better attack, while females are blue and have better defense. At level 16, they both enter their second form, Nidorina for girls, Nidorino for boys. Interestingly, Nidorina seems to be bipedal, while Nidorino is still a quadruped. I only brought this up because it's a weird detail I don't see get talked about much. Nidorinas are described as docile, while Nidorinos are very aggressive. Interestingly, despite not being the final form, Nidorina's Pokedex entries go on about how it raises its young. Again, raising the evolution age debate. Although since this is a stone evolution, this is even more confusing as to what this equates to. Speaking of, exposing either form to a moonstone will evolve it into Nidoking for males and Nidoqueens for females. They also both gain the ground type. They're both described as being very durable, with Nidoking even being able to break diamonds. Oh yeah. Now, one infamous thing about these guys is that while the entire Nidoran male line can breed, only Nidoran female can breed. Nidorina and Nidoqueen cannot breed at all. For the longest time, it was debated if this was a glitch or an intentional piece of lore, which was finally settled when an old lore book was found, indicating captive Nidoqueens can breed, proving that this is an intentional piece of lore. I don't know why that's the case, but whatever. Clefairy line is an adorable line of pink creatures that can best be described as looking like a more detailed version of Kirby. For the longest time they were normal types, but eventually Fairy was introduced, and they were retconned to be pure Fairy types. The line starts with Cleffa, which according to the decks are said to have arrived on Earth via meteor, indicating that this line is extraterrestrial in origin. They also dance on nights of shooting stars and love other confirmed extraterrestrial Pokemon. So yeah, definitely alien. I want someone to make a story about the planet they come from. I have never seen that happen, and I want it! Anyway, at high friendship it becomes Clefairy, which has tiny wings that under moonlight allow it to fly. They're a rarely seen species due to living in deep caves and only coming out at nights on full moon to dance. Despite their shy demeanor, they're a very friendly Pokemon, described as being very sociable with each other. When exposed to a moonstone, Clefairy evolves into Clefable, which further implies alien origin. But then again, other Pokemon that aren't implied to be extraterrestrial evolve with the stone, so who knows why there are Pokemon that evolve with the Moonstone. Whatever. Unfortunately, Clefable doesn't have much to talk about, as most of its dex entries just talk about how it's shy and has good hearing. So yeah, Clefairies, the pink alien fairies. You gotta love 'em! Vulpix is a fiery kitsune, which if you don't know, is a fox spirit in Japanese folklore that often have lots of tails. It's stated that at birth, Vulpix only has one tail that splits into multiple as it ages. But once again, this is something not reflected in gameplay. Inside of a Vulpix is a flame that never goes out, which allows them to create flames that sometimes resemble spirits. When exposed to a Firestone, Vulpix evolves into Ninetales, an even more majestic fox. According to legend, it's the resurrection of 9 saints who united in death, and its tails are often described as having mystical powers, with each tail said to have a different ability, and they live for 1,000 years. Also, if you pull on them, you'll be cursed forever. And according to one dex entry, they have mind control powers. So yeah, not really a creature you want to mess with. In Alola, Vulpix have adapted to snowy regions, although unlike Sandshrew, it seems like they just decided to live there and ended up evolving into ice types, with Ninetales gaining the fairy type upon evolving, which is now done with an ice stone instead of a firestone. In this region, they were revered as gods before they were identified as a subspecies of Vulpix, and even in modern times they're treated with much respect, and they even guide people who are lost. Granted, they are said to do this just to get them out of their territory, but that's still a good thing, right? Right? So yeah, Fiery Fox everywhere else, Icy Fox in Alola. The Balloon Pokemon. The Jigglypuff line is a pretty iconic one thanks to Jigglypuff being a consistent player in the Super Smash Bros. Series. There's also the fact that in the early days of the franchise, Jigglypuff was almost like a secondary mascot just behind Pikachu and the starters, since a lot of tie-in material would feature Jigglypuff. There's also the fact that for a while it was a pretty reoccurring Pokemon in the anime. Regardless of fame, the Jigglypuff line starts with Igglybuff, the definition of a bouncy baby. And I mean that, by the way, since it's said that once Igglybuff starts bouncing, it's impossible to stop. Also, they're sometimes described as being unable to sing, but this is once again a piece of lore that's not reflected in gameplay. At high friendship, it will become Jigglypuff, a Pokemon famous for its singing voice. According to the Dex, it is impossible to hear Jigglypuff singing without falling asleep. In fact, recordings of their songs are sold as sleep aids. When exposed to a moonstone, Jigglypuff evolves into Wigglytuff. In this form, it, for some reason, gains rabbit-like features. There's not much to say with this, as all their Pokedex entries just go on about how it's fluffy. Yeah, really. You know, I'm just now realizing that according to the Detective Pikachu movie, Jigglypuffs are covered in fur, which I genuinely kinda hate since I always assumed that besides from the tuft at the top of their head, they would have a similar texture to a balloon. But I guess I was wrong. Oh well, that's life. In Generation 9, we were introduced to the Paradox Pokemon Screamtail, which is speculated to be an ancient ancestor to the line. It's fairy psychic type and is said to be from 1,000,000,000 years ago, which is interesting as that's way longer than our world has had multicell animals, meaning the Pokemon world is technically further ahead evolutionary-wise than our world. Otherwise, not much to say here since even in universe not much is known about them. Here we have the infamous Zubat line. These guys gain notoriety for the fact that wild ones are ridiculously common and super annoying in combat, since most of their moves inflict status ailments on your Pokemon, making the fights take a lot longer than they should. To make matters worse, in Generation 1, this line is terrible in trainer-to-trainer combat. So yes, at first these guys were the definition of the boss when you unlock them as a playable character meme. Anyway, Zubat is a blue eyeless bat that lives in caverns around the world. According to the Dex, it has no need for eyes thanks to echolocation. In addition, they have very thin skin and are burnt easily by sunlight. So yeah, little vampires right here. At level 22, they evolve into Golbat. This guy has both eyes and feet, as well as a pretty scary diet. See, while it was left vague as to what Zubat ate, Golbat is explicitly a bloodsucker, and when it latches onto prey, it'll not stop sucking until it's full. Oh, by the way, Golbat is 5 foot tall. You can do the math here. Unfortunately for it, sometimes it drinks so much that it becomes too heavy to fly, making it easy prey for other predatory Pokemon. In Gen 2, we were given a new evolution for this line in Crobat, which evolves from Golbat at high friendship levels, which I find hilarious. It's almost like they knew the Zubat line was super hated in Gen 1, so as a way to mess with these people, they made it so you have to get along with them in order to get Crobat, which is an actually good Pokemon in battle. So, yeah, that's pretty funny. Crobat is an example of an animal that has become a bit too specialized. See, Crobat lost its feet in exchange for 2 back wings, which, while allowing it to fly faster and also silently to better sneak up on prey, it's also a lot harder for it to rest since it can't latch onto things anymore. So much like a cheetah, it gains speed while giving up conveniences most other animals have. So yeah, poor Zubats, hated by all and way too specialized. Also, female Zubat and Golbat have shorter fangs. Not sure what the point of that is. The Oddish line is a group of sapient plants. The first stage, Oddish, is a root vegetable-like Pokemon that, believe it or not, has actually been given a scientific name, Odium wanderus. During the day, they sleep with their face beneath the earth, and at night, they wander around looking for places to spread their seed. Also, I think they may be inspired by mandrake roots, since it's said that being pulled out of the ground will cause them to shriek horribly, similar to folklore regarding the plant. At level 21, they evolve into Gloom, a very sad-looking Pokemon that's constantly drooling a nectar that's said to attract prey. Yes, these things are canonically carnivores. I genuinely kinda hate that. Also, Gloom is described as being very foul-smelling, which, considering what it'll evolve into, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of, Gloom provides us with our first split evolution, meaning that under different circumstances they will evolve into a different Pokemon. First off, if exposed to a Leaf Stone, Gloom will evolve into Vileplume, an extremely toxic Pokemon with massive petals thanks to the Rafflesia on its head. Vileplume's pollen is said to be highly toxic and makes the air around it yellow. I'm already allergic to pollen, and since this one is toxic, that does not help one bit. Oh yeah, and it gets scattered whenever it walks, so there's that. On the other hand, if you give Gloom a sunstone, it'll become the grassy hula dancer Bellossom, which is notably pure grass type, implying the sunstone expunges all the toxins from its body or something like that. As you can probably tell by their design, Blossoms love to dance, which is thought to be some sort of sun summoning ritual. Oh, and you know it's complete crap? The Oddish line isn't found in Alola, aka the region based on Hawaii. Yeah, the Pokemon based on hula dancers, whose deck straight up says is found in the tropics, isn't found in the region based on Hawaii. So yeah, that's complete nonsense. But believe me, it won't be the last time there's Pokemon that should be found somewhere but just aren't for some reason. One last thing, Gloom and Vileplume have dimorphism. Females have larger spots. So there's that. Oh boy, this line. These guys are quite infamous for how morbid they are. But before we get to that, let's discuss some other things about them. Paris is a cicada-like Pokemon with 2 mushrooms on its back, and as I said earlier, despite not being plants, fungi-themed Pokemon are grouped in with grass types. Now you might think these are just part of their anatomy like other grass types, but you'd be wrong. At birth, mushroom spores attach to this Pokemon and start to grow. These mushrooms are called Tocha Queso, and they're very nutritious, often being used in medicine. Now you might think this would be a symbiotic relationship, but take a look at their name. Yeah. It all comes together at level 22 when it evolves into Parasect. Take note of the bug's soulless eyes. That's right, during this stage the mushroom has completely hijacked the bug, controlling its every move. And when they suck every last nutrient out of the bug, they put their spores on the creature's egg so the cycle can continue all over again. And to make matters worse, this is actually a reference to a real thing, as there's a species of fungus that'll hijack the brains of ants. Luckily, as far as we know, there's no fungus that can do that with humans. Well, so far anyway. Sweet dreams, everyone! Ah, Venonat, one of the most forgotten Pokemon at Generation 1. Seriously, I know I made it seem like Spearow was a nothing Pokemon, but at least it had a memorable role in the anime. This line has no such luck. This forgettability mostly stems from how weirdly late they appear in the game. At the point they appear, you have no real need for bug types anymore, and unlike other late-game bugs, they don't even have memorable designs, and they never got evolutions or megas. So, it almost feels like they were designed to be forgotten. Anyway, Venonat is a creature resembling the head of a fly. They have radar vision and ooze poison from their bodies. Really all there is to say there. At level 31, it evolves into Venomoth, a toxic moth constantly releasing poisonous powder from its wings that is a massive irritant for the skin and can even cause paralysis, so that's lovely. Also, they're not flying type, and unlike other floating Pokemon, they don't have the levitate ability, which means they can get hit by ground type moves, which is a very funny sight to see when paired up with something like a Butterfree, which is immune to ground moves, but Venomoth isn't, causing an earthquake attack to hit one of the flying bugs but not the other. Other than that, these guys are pretty nothing Pokemon, so let's move on. The Diglett line presents a weird thing Gen 1 did, where certain lines' evolutions were just it getting joined by other Pokemon, which was an odd choice and it brings up a lot of questions, but regardless, this is Diglett. A Pokemon resembling a whack-a-mole mole, Diglett is said to spend all of its time underground and in caves, since its thin skin makes it weak to sunlight. Unlike real moles, which are hated by farmers, Poke farmers love Diglett since the places it digs end up being perfectly tilled, making them optimal for crops. At level 26, they evolve into Dugtrio, a trio of Digletts that live together, I guess. Oh, except for the fact that in later generations they claim that the other 2 heads are actually connected to the same body. So, that's lovely. These guys are great at digging, capable of moving through the dirt at 60 miles an hour. Unfortunately, they move so fast they often cause earthquakes. They're also capable of burrowing through any surface, so there's also that. In Alola, due to the volcanic soil being tougher to dig through, Digletts in this region have evolved hairs made out of steel, which added the steel type to them, as well as acting like radars for their surroundings. When they evolve into Dugtrio, the steel whiskers become full-on heads of hair. Unpopular opinion, but I actually kind of like these designs. I don't know, I just think they're neat. Alright, we need to address the elephant in the room. As you might have noticed, Diglett is constantly buried in the ground. At no point in the franchise do we ever see what their lower half looks like. And they are determined to keep it that way. If you hack the game to use moves that put a Pokemon in the air, they'll just bring a chunk of ground with them. Moves that lift Pokemon, they won't be affected by. Moments that usually a Pokemon hop around will have them dig through the ground instead, etc., etc. This has led to much speculation over the years. Some jokingly suggest Diglett is some sort of eldritch horror. Others say that Diglett is like a muscular man, which is a headcanon that I absolutely hate. Others say it's just a mole. What we do know from the games is that 1. They have claws, since they can use scratch attacks, and 2. It's revealed in one instant that they do have feet. But, to this day, what remains beneath that hole is something we may never know. This is Meowth, a Pokemon based on Lucky Cats. Meowth is a pretty famous Pokemon thanks to the Pokemon anime, which features a talking Meowth as a main character. Sadly, this is not a recurring species trait, so no talking mouse for you. In Kanto and most of the other world, Meowths are beige cats with a lucky coin on their forehead. They're described as being greedy creatures that like to hoard anything shiny they come across, especially money. With it being stated that giving Meowth money will make it your friend, as long as you keep giving it money. So is that really true friendship? I don't think so. At level 28, Meowth evolves into Persian, with its coin being replaced by a gem in their forehead. They're described as being very unfriendly and requiring a lot of effort to get them to like you. So, basically a real cat. Also, like a real cat, they're pretty vain creatures like to kill small animals, so that's a thing. In Alola, Meowth were imported by royalty, and due to their spoiled lifestyle, they ended up becoming a lot more vain, which led to them becoming dark types. Eventually, they became wild animals, and now they're all over the island chain, although they still have their royal attitude of being very pompous, so they're very picky eaters. In Galar, the Meowths were brought over by people who are all but stated to be Vikings, so as such they've developed to be much tougher, becoming steel types with a large beard and horns. And most notably, it doesn't evolve into Persian anymore, but rather a different Pokemon known as Berserker. These guys have very hard hairs, and their claws can be put together to form daggers. Currently, Meowth is the only Pokemon that has more than one regional form. Oh yeah, Meowth is also one of the 3 unevolved Pokemon with a G-Max form, so there's that. Ah, Psyduck, the Pokemon that you cannot convince me isn't a platypus. I don't care what Nintendo says, they're platypi to me. Anyway, Psyduck is a water-type Pokemon constantly suffering from headaches, but these headaches actually awaken unusual psychic powers within them, and it's known to unleash them on unwilling participants. However, Psyducks never remember using these powers, as when it unleashes them, it's known to enter a state where it's essentially asleep. Because of the memory blank, Psyduck is a very confused species, constantly wondering what happened to it. It's kind of actually sad to think about. Imagine having superpowers, but you don't even know about it, and you're just constantly wondering why everyone seems to be afraid of you. That's sad. At level 33, Psyduck evolves into Golduck. In this form, its headaches appear to have subsided and has better control over its psychic powers, although it's still not perfect, as they can only really fully use them when the gem on their head glows, but it's still unknown as to what the cause of that is. Also in Gen 1 it's mentioned they're often mistaken for Kappas, which is just... okay, I can handle how early generations mention real animals and locations, but there's just something a lot more cursed about them mentioning a real monster that exists in our world. I don't know why. Anyway, Golduck are also said to be the fastest swimming Pokemon despite their speed stat not reflecting this, and they were once hunted for their head gems because it allegedly gave you powers if you held it. So yeah. Oh yeah, you might think I made an error or something since I just went on about how this line has great psychic powers and yet I put them down as pure water. Well, that's because, for some reason, despite learning many Psychic-type moves and literally having psychic powers, Psyduck isn't Psychic-type for some reason. I should also probably address the name. A lot of people think Golduck and Psyduck's names were accidentally swapped in production since it doesn't make sense for the blue one to be called Golduck. However, considering that it's still called Golduck in Japan, but Psyduck is Koduck, which means kid duck, I highly doubt there was a swap. Okay, now here's my reasons why Psyduck is a platypus and not a duck. 1. Look at Golduck's flippers, and tell me those don't look like platypi flippers. 2, it's described as a fish eater, like a platypus, but not like a duck. And 3, and the biggest one, every other Pokemon based on a bird in Gen 1 is part flying type, even ones based on birds that can't fly. And considering that a flying was literally going to be called bird type, this is even more significant. So ha! Take that, Psyduck, as a duck people. I just busted your theory like the Mythbusters. Not gonna sing this time, though. Mankey is a very grumpy monkey, and when I say grumpy, I mean it. These guys will become angry and rampage at the slightest provocation, and as a group species, if one of them gets angry, the whole troop gets angry and goes on a rampage. You don't even have to do anything to anger them either, as it's literally mentioned they'll sometimes become angry and rampage for no reason. At level 28, they'll evolve into Primeape, and oh boy, if you thought Mankey had anger issues, Primeape not only becomes angry just by being looked at, they will literally chase the thing that angered them down and not stop until they beat it up. Also, much like the Hulk, the angrier they get, the stronger they get, which does not help one bit. Oh yeah, and sometimes they get so mad they actually die, with their face in death being described as peaceful. What the heck? Okay, this is a dark series. I've officially realized it. Anyway, in Generation 9, Primeape got a new move called Rage Fist, where it converts its rage into energy and unleashes it via a punch. Using this move 20 times will evolve it into Annihilate, who is part Ghost type. It is said that thanks to that type, its anger is capable of reaching points not possible with a physical body. You know, I'm wondering what the evolutionary advantage of being ticked off all the time is. Like, I get it gives them strength, but man, this is a depressing family if you think about it. So, I'm gonna stop thinking about them. On a thankfully much lighter note, we have Growlithe, the dog tigers. They're always described as being very loyal and friendly, with them even possessing a permanent memory when it comes to smell. They've also been raised by humans since the Stone Age, just like real-life dogs, which is pretty cool. When exposed to a Firestone, they evolve into Arcanine, whose title is the legendary Pokemon, but it's not a legendary Pokemon in the game sense, but rather it appears in a lot of legends. Make sense? Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think so. Oh, by the way, they're apparently native to China, as in our China. And they are mentioning this as late as Gen 4, though since then they just say it's a revered figure in the East without specifying where. They're also described as being incredibly fast, despite speed not even being their highest stat, but regardless, they're still very majestic. In the game Legends Arceus, you're taken back in time where you see some Pokemon before they became what they are today, and Growlithe is one of them. Because of their habitat being highly volcanic, they've developed facial hair made of stone, making them part rock. I guess at some point between then and now the volcanoes went extinct and they lost that fur. Actually, come to think of it, the game's taking place in the modern versions of that region, Growlithe isn't even found there naturally. So I guess they just straight up went extinct in that area. So yeah, Growlithe the mystical legendary not legendary. Good for them. Poliwag family is a group of frog-like creatures, starting with Poliwag, which is a tadpole with legs that aren't very good at running. Instead, they're mostly used to help them swim. Oh yeah, you might have also noticed the spirals on this line's chest. Yeah, that's their organs. Yep, this line has thin skin, and because of that, their organs are plainly visible from their chest. At level 25, they evolve into Poliwhirl, and you know, it always bothered me how this line later evolutions don't have mouths. Now, we know they can still eat, but I'm not sure where the food enters. So, yeah, that's just always a design choice that bothered me. Poliwhirl is a lot more adapted to life on land, but much like a real frog, they prefer to stay in the water. Interestingly, though, it's stated they sweat a substance that keeps them moist, which is completely unlike frogs or any cold-blooded animal, so that's pretty cool. They also can use their organs as a hypno wheel, so that's a thing. Also, I've noticed that early on, Poliwhirl received a lot of attention in merchandise. It's like if there was a Pokemon merchandise line, it would usually include Pikachu, the starters, Jigglypuff, and Poliwhirl. This is interesting because Pikachu is the mascot, the starters are, well, starters, and Jigglypuff was a major character in the anime. Poliwhirl didn't even have such notoriety. It was just in a lot of merchandise. This is most definitely because of how Poliwhirl was a favorite of the series creator, but as more marketable Pokemon came out, they really stopped using Poliwhirl all that much. Now this is another branched evolution. When Poliwhirl is exposed to a Water Stone, it'll evolve into Poliwrath. Despite the name, fighting type, and its, rather mean-looking appearance, they're never described as being aggressive. Instead, their dex entries just talk about how they're powerful swimmers that rarely need to breathe. They can even cross the Pacific Ocean, which is not just a weird early game mentioning real location thing either, as they're still referring to it by name even in the most recent games. So I guess that means the oceans are still the oceans in this world. So that's a thing, I guess. When Poliwhirl is traded with a King's Rock, it evolves into Politoad, which no longer has visible intestines and overall looks more developed than even Poliwrath, which raises a lot of questions. Anyways, Politoad are seen as royalty by the other Pollies, with their croaks being stated to summon nearby wags and whirls, where they then use them as subjects for them to lead. Females also have smaller cheeks, which is possibly a reference to how real-life frogs will have males inflate their throats to impress females. So yeah, that's what I'm going with. Anyway, Poliwag family, a group of frogs that I guess never fully develop and have no mouths, yet they can still eat. Aberline is a group of rat things that have incredible psychic powers. Abra is a Pokemon that sleeps for most of the day, which you might think would make it an easy target for predators, except that even when asleep they're fully cognizant of their surroundings, and if any danger is detected, they teleport away. Also, Teleport is the only move they naturally learn until they evolve. At level 16 they become Kadabra, now with a mustache, a fluffy tail, and a spoon. Kadabra is a much more useful Pokemon capable of applying its psychic abilities in combat instead of just dipping out. Also, its psychic energy causes machines to malfunction when nearby, and there was once an incident where a kid with psychic powers woke up as a Kadabra. Contra popular belief, this isn't supposed to be its backstory. It's more likely just supposed to be a weird one-off event that isn't connected to the species' origins. So, yeah. Also, Kadabra is notable for being a very controversial Pokemon. As in, it actually got Nintendo sued. See, there's this guy named Uri Geller who claims to have psychic powers, which he mostly uses to bend spoons, and he sued Pokemon in the year 2000, claiming that Kadabra was an unauthorized use of his image. Not helping is the fact that Kadabra's Japanese name is very similar to his name. And Kadabra was also attacked by many religious groups, claiming that the star on his head was a pentagram, even though it's just a star, and there were claims that the lines on its stomach resembled a symbol used by, the evil German people. So it was also accused of being anti-Semitic. Now look, Pokemon is no stranger to controversy, especially regarding religion, but it's honestly incredible how many controversies this one Pokemon attracted. Especially since the markings are actually meant to be references to the symbol used on cards, meant to test a few of psychic powers known as Zener cards. Now, because of all these controversies and lawsuits, Nintendo more or less shadow banned Kadabra from the franchise. It still appears in the video games, but it stopped appearing in the card games, it took a long hiatus from the anime, and it tends to be glossed over whenever the Abra line is brought up. But believe it or not, this isn't even the generation's most controversial Pokemon. Trust me, we'll be getting to them soon. Okay, now that discussion's over, let's get back to discussing this line. When traded, Kadabra will evolve into Alakazam. It loses its tail, gets a bigger mustache, and gains another spoon, which apparently makes anything eaten with it taste delicious. Alakazam is a very intelligent Pokemon, said to have an IQ of over 5,000. It also never forgets anything it learns, and its brain never stops growing. One downside, though, is that it traded intelligence for a lack of muscle. As such, it has to use its powers to move basically every part of its body. But hey, low strength for psychic powers. Sounds like a pretty fair trade-off, if you ask me. Alakazam also Mega Evolves, where it gains both a huge beard and even more spoons. In this form, Alakazam has completely lost control of its muscles in exchange for even greater psychic powers, and even the ability to see through time. Oh, also, Kadabra and Alakazam females have shorter mustaches, so that's a thing. So yeah, very powerful yet controversial Pokemon. Machop is a line of reptilian bodybuilders that are revered for their strength. Starting out as Machop, these guys never stop exercising and spend all their time lifting boulders and learning new fighting styles. Plus, their muscles have evolved to never be sore, no matter how hard they train. So good for them. At level 28, they evolve into Machoke, which is said to be so strong that they have to wear a power dampening belt in order to restrain them. Now, despite all this power, Machoke are actually very friendly and are known to help people with tasks that involve heavy lifting. In fact, they're actually employed as movers in several regions, so that's nice of them. When traded, they evolve into Machamp, and if you thought Machoke was strong, this guy, even while still wearing his belt, is truly something to fear. Now that it has four arms, it's able to simultaneously hold on to things while still hitting them. It can lift mountains with just one arm. It can fire 1,000 punches in just 2 seconds, and it often launches its foes over the horizon. Man, I do not want to know what this thing can do without its belt. Luckily, though, one weakness is that their forearms can often become tangled together, leaving them open to attack. Oh yeah, they also have a G-Max form whose strength is literally said to be incalculable. Okay, good thing psychic types exist, or else these guys could probably take over if they weren't friendly. The Bellsprout line is inspired by pitcher plants, and they're often seen as a counterpart to the Oddish line, with them both being grass poison types. Bellsprout is a pretty weedy looking Pokemon, but don't let that fool you. They're still a very capable predators. Unlike real pitcher plants that attract prey with sweet smelling fluids, Bellsprout is an active predator, hunting down bugs by ensnaring them with their vines. They also possess an acid capable of melting metal, even though poison can't hit steel types, so yeah. At level 21, they evolve into Weepinbell, which has big, goofy eyes. Unlike Bellsprout, which only eats bugs, Weepinbell will eat anything they can fit in their mouths. And if it's too big for them, they'll just use their razor-sharp leaves to cut them into more manageable chunks. Oh yeah, and they spray all the food with a poisonous powder in order to incapacitate them first. Quite a lovely Pokemon, isn't it? When exposed to a leaf stone, they evolve into Victory Bell, which was definitely supposed to be spelled with two L's, but due to space limitations, they couldn't do it, and the name just stuck. Anyways, if you thought Weepinbell was scary, just wait till you hear about this guy. Like real pitcher plants, they attract prey with sweet-smelling aromas, except unlike real pitcher plants, which are small, Victory Bell is 5 feet tall, so its diet is a lot more varied. Oh yeah, they also live in colonies where it's said that no one who's ever encountered them has ever lived to tell the tale. Oh, and the more prey they eat, the sweeter their nectar, allowing them to catch even more prey. They can also wave their vines around to look like prey animals in order to attract carnivores. So yeah, thankfully fire types exist or these things would be even scarier. The Tentacool line is pretty much the aquatic version of the Zubat line, being a Pokemon that, when you're in its territory, they're basically the only things you'll come across. Tentacool is a jellyfish Pokemon that only has 2 tentacles, and refreshingly, it doesn't have any electric powers, unlike basically every other media jellyfish. Instead, like real jellyfish, they kill prey by wrapping them in their tentacles and injecting them with poisonous barbs. They also possess strange gems on their body, which allows them to use energy attacks. At level 30, they evolve into Tentacruel, said to possess 80 tentacles that can adjust the length of. This makes catching prey a breeze. Their crystals are also powered up, being capable of releasing ultrasonic blasts that can even make the water around it rough. Also, even though they're usually solitary animals, when they do come together in groups, they can quickly wipe out local fish populations, which is probably a reference to the Nemora's jellyfish infestation off the coast of Japan. So yeah, these guys ain't squishy. Remember when I said the Zubat is the definition of the boss when you unlock it as a playable character? I take it back. Meet the Geodude family. A family of sentient rocks that were clearly named when Pokemon didn't have genders. Wait, actually, why do rocks even have... Oh, never mind. Geodude is a floating rock of arms. Not much to say of them, as most of its dex entries just say they're mistaken for rocks, and they climb mountains with their strong arms. So, yeah. At level 25, they evolve into Graveler, which is an even larger rock, now with feet and another pair of arms. Gravelers are slow walkers, so as such they mostly move around by rolling. When they roll, little can stop them, as they'll just roll over whatever is in their path, only stopping when they want to. They also have a diet of rocks. Also, none of its Pokedex entries mention its forearms, so I'm not sure why they have them. When traded, they evolve into Golem, a weird lizard creature that's inside a boulder. Yeah, this is one of the more confusing evolutions, but not the last one we'll be seeing. Also, despite the name, it has nothing to do with actual golems, which we will be seeing Pokemon more definitively based on them later. Golem is a very tough Pokemon, not even dynamite can break its rocks. They're also capable of blowing themselves up and surviving, which is actually how they get over things too tall for them to climb. Also, like a snake, it sheds its skin once a year in order to grow even larger. And it said that the skin underneath is a tender white material that hardens when exposed to air. What are these things? In Alola, this line has evolved to be magnetic. As such, the ground type has been replaced with electric, and they're said to be pretty painful to touch, as even just grazing them will zap you. As they evolve, their electricity only grows stronger, with Golem's electricity being capable of causing numbness and fainting even if you only barely touch its rocks. Also, they'll sometimes use Geodudes for ammo if they can't find rocks to throw, so that's just kind of funny to me. Now, I mentioned earlier Geodude is a boss when you unlock him character. Let me explain. See, if you either pick Charmander as your starter, or you played Pokemon Yellow and got Pikachu, the first boss fight, which uses a Geodude to start out with, is going to be miserable. See, all your starters starting out only know normal type moves, which it resists. Charmander's a fire type, so its fire type moves won't help either, and Pikachu cannot hurt them at all thanks to electricity not hurting ground types. Because of this, kids playing for the first time are probably like, wow, this is a strong Pokemon, I want one so I can be invincible. And then when they catch one, they're met with the horrifying revelation that this line is pretty terrible in battle. They have a lot of weaknesses, two of which are double. They're very slow, and especially in Gen 1, they have a terrible move pool thanks to a lack of viable rock moves. Later gens improved them slightly, especially with Alola, but most people will never forget the Pokemon that seemed stronger than it was. Ponyta, the Fire Horse. These equine Pokemon are most notable for their speed, as you would probably expect from a horse. At birth, they're not able to run very fast, and they don't even have their fire mane until an hour after their birth. However, as they age, they get better and better at running, and capable of running at top speeds. Also, they're able to jump very high, with them being said to jump over the Eiffel Tower, which doesn't exist in lore anymore. Their hooves are also as hard as diamond, and like real horses, they have powerful kicks that they can do when they're scared. Interestingly, it's established that Ponyta's flames only hurt people it doesn't like, as if it trusts you, then its flames mysteriously don't burn. At level 40, Ponyta evolves into a fiery unicorn Rapidash. These guys are even faster than Ponyta, and in fact love racing so much that they'll challenge anything fast looking to a race. And they're said to be so fast their legs don't even touch the ground when they move. In Galar, due to Ponyta essentially becoming one of the universe, they have evolved to be psychic types, capable of reading people's moralities and healing them with their horn. So, basically they turn into a stereotypical unicorn. Upon evolving into Rapidash, they also gain the fairy type. In this form, they become very dainty runners thanks to a boost from their telekinetic abilities. So yeah, fire ponies have become literal unicorns. That's lovely. Slowpoke is a line of otter hippo things. As you can tell by their name, this line is very slow, speed-wise and intelligence-wise. In fact, when Slowpoke gets hit, it takes a few seconds for it to realize that it's in pain. Slowpoke are piscivorous, spending all their day dipping their tail, which is coated in a sweet substance, into the water to attract fish. However, they often forget what they're doing and just end up laying there all day. Their tail is also considered a delicacy. Yeah. At level 37, they evolve into Slowbro, which is now bipedal and with a spiral clam on its shell, which is apparently the Pokemon Shelter, which caused it to evolve by biting its tail. Like I said, a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon evolutions are kind of inexplicable and don't really line up with lore or gameplay. Yeah. The Shelter is constantly seeping poison into the Slowpoke, which causes it to be completely unable to feel pain, and can even cause it to become temporarily intelligent. Because its tail is covered, they can't fish anymore, so now they have to be active predators. Interestingly, it's stated multiple times that if the Shelter were to be removed, they would turn back into Slowpokes, which is notably one of the only instances of de-evolution in the franchise, even if it can't happen during gameplay. Slowbro also has a Mega Evolution, where, the Shelter consumes its entire body. Humorously, it's canon that the Slowpoke isn't affected by the evolution at all, it's only Shelter that evolves. If traded with a King's Rock, then Slowpoke will instead evolve into Slowking. This time, the Shelter bit them on the head, and the poison caused their full potential to become unlocked. As such, Slowking are very intelligent, described as being comparable to top scientists. Slowking are constantly trying to figure out more about the world and are known for always remaining calm no matter what the situation is. However, if the shelter is removed, then it will forget everything it has learned. In Galar, Slowpoke has a diet of seeds that ended up causing it to not only have a spicy taste to its tail, but it also seems to have opened something in their brain without need for a shelter. Presumably because of this more available food, Slowpokes in this region have lost the water type and become pure psychics. The way they evolve has also changed, now evolving if exposed to either a cuff or a crown, depending on what you want. When given a cup, it becomes Slowbro. This time, the shelter is on its arms, where the toxins are absorbed into the Slowpoke, causing it to gain the poison type. The Slowbro can also use the shelter as a defense mechanism, using it to shoot out venom at enemies. If instead given a crown, they become Galarian Slowking. However, this time, the shelter is the one in control. Now as smart as a Slowking would be, the shelter controls every move of the Pokemon. They're also capable of making strange potions by combining their toxins with what the Slowking had previously eaten. So yeah, this is a very interesting line indeed. The Magnemite line is interesting, as despite their robotic appearance, they are apparently a naturally occurring species, which is weird to think about. Magnemite is a little sphere robot-like creature with magnets for hands. They feed on electricity and are capable of creating magnetic forces so powerful that they can pull in objects from over 300 feet away. They also float thanks to electromagnets. At level 30, they evolve into Magneton, which is 3 Magnemites stuck together. Like I said, more Pokemon without explanation is a common theme this generation. It's stated that Magnetons appear frequently during times of solar flares or lots of sunspots, and their magnetism is so powerful that they can often dry out local bodies of water, and any electronic even remotely near them will instantly malfunction. When leveled up in areas of high magnetism, then they will evolve into Magnezone. This Pokemon is interesting because it's said to constantly be receiving and sending signals to an unknown source, causing some to speculate they are alien in origin. They also have radar abilities, and detaching things they magnetize is incredibly difficult. In Gen 9, we were introduced to the Paradox Pokemon Sandy Shocks, which is electric ground. Not much is known about these guys besides it being 10,000 years old, and presumably being an ancestor to the line, so not much to say here. Very strange Pokemon indeed. Farfetch'd is a duck holding a green onion. This might seem like a random concept, but it's actually based on a Japanese idiom about not just waiting around for things, by using the example of a duck walking up to you holding onions. Anyway, a Farfetch carry this onion at all times, and use them as a weapon if attacked. It's also used as a snack in times of low food. Sadly, because it's an edible animal holding a seasoning, they are often hunted for food, causing their numbers to drastically fall. Luckily though, they became a protected species and their numbers are slowly rising. For the longest time, Farfetch'd was kind of a nothing Pokemon. Didn't have any evolutions, had terrible stats, and it was generally overshadowed by the other bird Pokemon. But then in Gen 8, it was finally thrown a bone with it acquiring a regional form. In Galar, the plants that it carries are a lot thicker, so it had to become stronger to hold them. This led to them becoming pure fighting types and developing a warrior-like personality. This region also gave Farfetch an evolution after all this time. If they land 3 powerful hits in a single battle, they will evolve into Surfetched. Its stalk has now become sharp as a sword, and now it carries a shield. This Pokemon will spend all of its time fighting until its leaf withers, at which point it will retire from combat. So yeah, from nothing to warrior. What a glow up. Despite the name, Doduo has nothing to do with dodos, being closer in appearance to kiwi birds and closer in behavior to ostriches. Doduo is described as being a poor flyer that has instead become a powerful runner. Though despite that, it's still flying type because all Gen 1 birds are flying type, so yeah. The duo's 2 heads work together for survival, as when one head sleeps or eats, the other head acts as lookout. They also have mild telekinesis, with the 2 heads being able to talk to each other mentally. Notably, one dex entry states that this species started out as a mutation, implying they evolved from a single-headed bird. So that's weird. At level 31, they evolve into Dodrio. Gaining a new head, they've become great planners thanks to having 3 brains to work with. They're also a lot more aggressive, known to angrily peck at anything they deem a threat. However, one issue is that the 3 heads will often fight with each other, especially when hungry. Luckily, you only need to feed one head to calm them down. This line also has sexual dimorphism, with males having black necks and females having brown necks, which is possibly a reference to how ostriches have a similar dimorphism, with males having black feathers while females have brown. but that's just a theory. Introducing the most creatively named Pokemon of all time. Seal with an E is a pinniped with a horn that sleeps for most of the day, living in cold areas and is very clumsy on land. Wait, that's literally just describing a seal, as in a real seal. Okay. One difference is that they use their air holes using the horns on their heads, so that's a difference, I guess. Other than that, yeah, these guys are literally just seals. With an A. At level 34, they evolve into Dugong. That's D-E-W Gong, completely different from D-U Gong. Gaining the ice type, they're also described as being similar to seals. Also, they were mistaken for mermaids, just like real dugongs. Okay, I'm done with this line. They're basically just cryokinetic seals. Not much to say here. Grimer is a living pile of sludge. Yeah. Grimer as a species came into being after X-ray radiation from the moon brought a pile of sludge to life. Now they're a goop monster that smells terrible and causes any land it walks across to become barren. Also, they reproduce via mitosis, with parts of their body falling off and creating new Grimers. But they still have genders, though, which, I do not like what that implies. However, they're debatably also a good creature, as they're described as eating pollutants, so that's a positive, I guess. At level 38, they evolve into Muck. And oh boy, if you thought Grimer was bad, just wait till you hear about this guy. Its stench can cause fainting, just touching it will make you sick, and all plants near it will die. Oh, and during hot days, it'll smell even worse, so that's a bonus. However, because of cleanup efforts, their numbers are starting to decrease due to a lack of pollutants to eat. In order to prevent their extinction, people are starting to build ponds that are intentionally made dirty just to keep them alive. It's actually kind of wholesome, not gonna lie. In Alola, this line was brought in to help with a garbage problem. Because the Grimers here have to eat solid matter instead of polluted water, they've evolved to have much tougher mouths. And they're covered in toxic crystals now. And for some reason, they've become the dark type. And because of the varied colors of the trash they eat, Alola and Muck are very colorful. But don't touch it, it still contains over 100 types of poison. So yeah, living sludge monsters that I actually kind of feel bad for. The Shelter line is the one I mentioned earlier that assists the Slowpokes in evolution, but by themselves, not really much to say. Shelter is described as having a borderline indestructible shell. They can swim backwards by rapidly closing their shell, and they use their tongue for digging and eating. Also, sand that gets into them is sometimes turned into pearls. Gosh darn it, it's another Pokemon that's just a cartoony version of a real animal. Anyway, when given a water stone, it evolves into Cloyster. Now with the ice type, Cloyster is a super durable Pokemon. Not even dynamite can crack its shell. As such, its insides have never been seen. They're also covered in spikes so they can shoot out at anything that bothers them. But other than that, it's once again just a clam. So, not much to say here. The Ghastly line are a group of ghosts that are also made up of toxic gases. In the Ghastly stage, they're basically sentient mist, capable of going into any area and enveloping anything in poisonous gases. One drawback, however, is that wind easily blows them away since they basically have no mass. It is said that Ghastlies came into being from a combination of human sorrow and graveyard mist. Also, the black part in them is said to be the soul of people who died from the gas, so that's pleasant. Level 25, they evolve into Haunter, Pokemon with a long tongue that it uses to feast on its victim's life force. In addition, those licked by Haunter will never stop shaking until they die. Also, they like placing curses on people for no reason. So that's another fun thing they do. When traded, they evolve into Gengar, the Shadow Pokemon. A fitting name considering it moves through shadows and is capable of mimicking the shadow of anything. Oh yeah, they also steal Life Force in case you're wondering. Oh, by the way, the Pokedex straight up recommends that if a Gengar is pursuing you, you should just give up since it'll never stop. What does it want with you? Well, since they were once human, they want to kill you so you can become a ghost and give them companionship. Also, they're treated as boogeyman figures in some regions, and that they'll go after naughty children, so that's fun. When it Mega Evolves, Gengar ends up becoming fused to the ground, which is actually a result of it being partially in another dimension. This allows them to teleport anywhere they want to. Because yeah, that's a power it needed. Oh yeah, they also try to kill anyone they come across, even their own trainers. Gengar also has a G-Max form, where it gains a gaping mouth, which is said to be the gates to the afterlife. And considering what we know about these guys, I wouldn't be surprised if this is just straight up the gates of hell. Well, this is a pretty terrifying line. And be prepared because most ghost-type Pokemon have some questionable dex entries. So just keep that in mind as we go on. Okay. I know I called both Zubat and Geodude bosses when you unlock them as characters, but I really think that that title best applies to Onix. Both for similar reasons to Geodude being a hard-to-beat Pokemon depending on who you picked, but also, just look at it. It has a very intimidating design, being a giant rock snake that looked like it could break anything like a toothpick. However, much like Geodude, actually trying to use one is a very tough thing to do. Same weaknesses as Geodude, and lack of good moves with a low attack stat. So overall, very much a joke. Lore-wise, they're described as being a subterranean species constantly burrowing through the ground, and thanks to having magnets in their brain, they can never be lost, even when it can't see where it's going. Also like Geodude, they eat rocks, so that's a thing. After being a joke character in Gen 1, it seemed pretty hopeless for them, seemingly doomed to be terrible forever. But then, something happened in Gen 2 that saved it. When traded holding a metal coat, Onyx will evolve into Steelix, replacing its rocks with steel. This very much saved the line, as Steelix is a much better Pokemon in combat. The new Steel type cut down its weaknesses, gave it a new immunity, and lets it resist most of the types in the game. This really salvaged Onyx in the eyes of the fans, and to this day, Steelix is a common sight in tournaments. Lore-wise, Steelix is said to be harder than a diamond thanks to living under such high pressure. It also eats rocks, thanks for asking. Also, females only have one lower jaw spike, so that's a thing. Steelix also got a Mega Evolution. It's now covered in gems and orbited by reflective surfaces. Sadly, these guys don't have dex entry, so we don't know any lore related to them. The lesson here is that all you have to do to save something from mediocrity is to coat it in metal. The end. Drowsy is a tapir, based on the Baku, which is a creature in Japanese folklore that eats dreams, which is exactly what Drowsy does. Also, in the first generation, it was straight up said that they're descendants of the Baku. Not mistaken for them, descended from them. Anyway, Drowsy has a diet consisting of dreams. It's said that they're the reason you don't remember most of your dreams, and also they get sick when they eat nightmares. They're also able to tell what you're dreaming about just by sniffing you, and they can cause your nose to become itchy. They're also master hypnotists. Overall, a little creepy, but nothing too bad. Until level 26 when they evolve into the infamous Hypno. Hypno cuts out the middleman and just puts the nearest human to sleep whenever they're hungry. Now possessing a swinging pendulum, Hypno can entrance anyone to sleep in mere seconds, regardless of how tired you were beforehand. Oh, and don't forget about how there was once an incident where a Hypno straight up kidnapped a child. Yes, really. It kidnapped a child, presumably to use it as a never-ending meal ticket. Oh boy. This incident brought Hypno into infamy within the fandom, and as such, most Hypno depictions in fan works will portray them as kidnappers, such as the infamous Hypno's Lullaby. There was even an officially licensed shirt called Sleeper 97 that depicted a silhouette of Hypno leading two kids by hand to who knows where. Why did they why would you why? Also, female Hypnos have longer chest hair. Because. So yeah, Hypno's a good contender for creepiest Pokemon of all time. Word of advice, if you ever live in the Pokemon world, move to Alola. Because there's a Pokemon there that's permanently asleep, and Hypno started targeting them instead of humans. So, you know where to go if you're scared of them. Krabby is a crab with 4 legs instead of 10. By the way, if you thought Seal's name was on the nose, Krabby's Japanese name is literally just Crab. Not even with a K, just Crab. Also, there are another Pokemon that are described as basically just being their animal they're based on. As they burrow, they foam at the mouth. Although unlike real crabs who do it to help them breathe air, Krabby does it to look bigger as a defense mechanism. And their claws grow back if they fall off. So yeah, Crab is a crab. Level 28, Crab evolves into Kingler, now possessing a crown and a giant claw like a fiddler crab. This claw has 10,000 horsepower, and is used to pry open the tough shells of shelters and cloisters. It's also hard as steel. Unfortunately, this claw is so heavy that they get tired very easily, constantly having to lug it around. And for some reason, they gave Kingler of all Pokemon a G-Max form. In this form, it now has a beard made out of foam, which is highly acidic, and their claws can pulverize anything. So yeah, crabs. Voltorb is a spherical Pokemon that has the same colorations as a Pokeball. In fact, it's widely theorized that there's a connection between Voltorb and the Pokeball, with them first being discovered in the factory that makes them. Voltorb feeds on electricity and has a very bad temper, electrocuting anyone who even brushes against them. And in extreme cases, they'll blow up. At level 30, they evolve into Electrode. Now, with inverted color scheme, Electrode is packed to the brim with electricity. So much, in fact, that even the slightest bump can cause explosions. Because of this, they are highly feared Pokemon, and most people avoid the areas they're native to. In the past, Electrode was an electric grass type, and it had a much better temper, being very excitable and laughing whenever they discharged electricity. I said they had a better temper, I never said they were nicer. They also used to evolve with a leaf stone. Electrode is also a lot safer back then, having a texture similar to the in-universe fruit known as apricorns. It's also never mentioned that they have the same exploding problem as modern Electrodes. In fact, they only attack if they're actively provoked. Just makes you wonder what happened that turned them into the temperamental bombs, doesn't it? Execute is a bizarre Pokemon resembling a clutch of eggs. The games keep flip-flopping on if they're really eggs or not, as it seems like every other game is like, oh yeah, they're eggs. Actually, no, they're seeds. Nope, eggs. JK, they're seeds, etc., etc. The eggs are telekinetic, being able to communicate with each other mentally. It's also established that they have a sort of gravitational pull on each other, keeping them from getting lost. In fact, they get very anxious if they're not in groups of 6. When exposed to a leaf stone, they evolve into Executor. Now resembling a palm tree, there are curiously only 3 heads despite Execute traveling in groups of 6. These heads are also capable of independent thought, and unlike Dodrio, they're much more peaceful to each other. If an Executor's head falls off, then the head will become an Execute. I guess that's how they reproduce. In Alola, Executor is part dragon type and is much taller. As a tropical species, the heat of the island chain causes them to reach what is theorized to be their true form. See, it's been mentioned in previous Pokedex entries that Executor was originally from the tropics, implying that the form we're familiar with is the result of them compressing to preserve heat or something like that. Who knows? Maybe the compression also gave him telekinetic powers, but then again, even in Alola, Execute is psychic type, so who knows what's going on here? Anyways, Alolan Executor is a very revered Pokemon, with Alolan locals being said to be very proud of Executor. So yeah, eggs that become a palm tree. Very interesting. Okay, pop quiz. Would you eat an Execute? I would. I don't care. That's just what I would do. Cubone is one of those things in video games that have a concrete backstory despite there clearly being more than one of them. Cubone is a dinosaurian-like creature wearing a skull and wielding a femur bone. According to the Dex, Cubone has the bones of its dead mother. It often gets sad thinking about her and cries a lot, with the streaks near the eyes being tear marks. No one has ever seen their real face. Now look, I agree, this Dex entry is very sad, but it also doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you think about it. For one, this is a species. So is this like a recurring thing that happens to all Cubone? Is there another species that Cubones are distant from, that they're the offspring of that species, and a Cubone is what you call them when they go through some sort of baggage or something? I don't know. And secondly, you can breed them in droves and they all wear a skull despite coming from the same mother. So, what? Okay, I'm not gonna think about it. Let's just move on. At level 28, they evolve into Marowak. The skull is now fused to the head, and they've moved on from their mother's death to become very tough warriors. Their bones are deadly weapons, capable of being thrown like boomerangs at things that bother them. They can also use these bones to tap out messages to other Marowaks. In Alola, they also have a rivalry with the vulture Pokemon Mandibuzz, since they feed on Cubones because, well, they're vultures, Cubone wears bones, vultures can eat bones, you can do the math. As such, when they evolve into Marowak, they start to fight back. So yeah, from sad child to bloodthirsty adult. What an upgrade. In Alola, Cubone only evolves at night. In this form, it's a fire ghost type, with the flame on its bones speculated to be the spirit of their vengeful mother protecting their young. They also bury their fallen allies, and the flames are said to cause a pain that never goes away. So yeah, very tragic line whose tragedy becomes confusing when you try to figure out how this happens on a species level. But, like I said, not gonna think about it. There are way too many theories already. The Hitmonline is interesting. You see, in Gen 1, there are two Pokemon named Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee. While the name suggested they were related, you could only get one of them, and besides name, nothing else suggested a link. But then in Gen 2, we were introduced to the baby Pokemon Tyrogue, who can evolve into either Hitmonchan or Hitmonlee, as well as a new form Hitmontop, proving once and for all that they're the same species, I guess? I don't know how this would be classified. Also, this line is completely male, so I have no idea how they reproduce. Anyways, let's start with Tyrogue and then go in dex order. Tyrogue is a scrappy little Pokemon, as well as the only baby Pokemon whose existence actually feels right, since it connected two unrelated Pokemon together. They're full of energy and always want to fight. In fact, not fighting stresses them out. They also never give up, as even when they lose, they're still just as peppy as always. This training can pay off in three different ways when they evolve. At level 20, if their attack stat is higher than their defense stat, they evolve into Hitmonlee. Pokemon based on kickboxing that might have also drawn inspiration from Blemias, which are weird creatures from Roman folklore that are said to be men without heads that have their face on their torso. But that's just a theory. For all we know, it could have just been a design they liked in order to highlight kickboxing or something like that. Anyway, Hitmonlee possesses legs capable of stretching out, which helps him strike enemies from long distances, and allows him to move faster thanks to having larger strides. They're also capable of hardening their feet to be as strong as diamond. However, unlike the Machop line, this line does get muscle sores, as it's said that after battle they tend to have to massage their legs. So yeah. When Tyrogue's defense is higher than its attack, it evolves into Hitmonchan, the boxing Pokemon. Hitmonchans are famous for their rapid punches, said to be able to be sent out so fast that it doesn't even look like it's moving. They're also a very determined species, never giving up despite how hopeless the odds are. However, they don't have the best stamina, as they become tired after just 3 minutes of fighting. So if you ever get in a fight with them, just keep dodging for 3 minutes and you'll be fine. I say that like it's easy. You'll probably die in the first few seconds. I mean, these fists can literally pulverize concrete, so never mind. If its attack and defense are equal, then Tyrogue will evolve into Hitmontop, which looks like a scarecrow. Hitmontop's main attack method is to spin on its head, where it'll rapidly strike you with its powerful legs. Before they do this, however, they distract foes by doing a very graceful dance in order to lower their defenses, and then they strike at you. So yeah, a group of great fighters that never give up. Good for you guys. Lickitung, a Pokemon that couldn't learn Lick until Generation 2, despite its entire character being that it has a giant tongue. Lickitung is a weird pink lizard creature with a tongue that can stretch out to 7 feet long, and like a chameleon, this tongue's very sticky, allowing it to grab food from afar. They also have perfect taste memory, and whenever they come across something new, the first thing they'll do is lick it. That doesn't sound like it would be pleasant. Oh, they also don't like sour things. When Lickitung levels up knowing the move Rollout, it turns into that thing, Licky Licky. It now has a tuft of hair, a weird bib thing, and an upside down Wi-Fi symbol. They can also stretch their tongue over 80 feet. Their saliva can also melt anything, and... Okay, I'm sorry. I cannot get over that design. What were they going for exactly? They just look ridiculous. So yeah, Lickitung really got the short end of the stick in terms of evolution, and we are moving on because I refuse to keep talking about Licky Licky. Coughing is a purple sac of poisonous gas. While Grimer is based on water pollution, coughing is based on air pollution, which is further proven by how this line's beta names were literally NY and LA, as in New York and Los Angeles. Very subtle. Coughing is filled to the brim with poisoned gases that it can release when threatened. This gas can cause coughing, and teary eyes, but otherwise is not described as being that bad compared to other poison types, so luckily it's not the gases that makes coughing deadly. Nope, instead it's the fact that these gases are highly flammable and even the slightest rise in heat can cause them to explode. That's what makes them really deadly. At level 35, they evolve into Wheezing. This is another example of Gen 1, another Pokemon syndrome, as it's consistently said in Pokedex entries that Wheezing is what happens when two coughing fuse together, but that's not reflected in gameplay. Anyway, Wheezing is a walking chemistry set, constantly mixing the poison in its bodies in order to create powerful toxins. They also have a diet of terrible odors, and their gases can be used to make perfumes. So, yeah. In Galar, during the time period that is all but stated to be the Industrial Revolution, the abundance of factories caused horrible air pollution all over the area. And because coughings feed on noxious fumes, they were basically in heaven. Eventually, this caused them to evolve to a point where they can inhale large quantities of smog and expel it as clean air, making them very eco-friendly Pokemon. It also caused them to gain the fairy type for some reason. So yeah, poison balls of gas that are actually good for nature. Good for them. Rhyhorn is a rhinoceros made of stone. Their bones are 1,000 times tougher than human bones, which, considering how strong the femur is, those are pretty tough bones to indeed. Rhyhorn also has a powerful charge that can shatter a skyscraper with just a single tackle. One downside to them, however, is that they're pretty dumb. They can only hold one thought at a time, and they often forget why they're charging in the first place. But still, don't provoke them, or you could end up as a pancake. At level 42, they evolve into Rhydon, who, fun fact, has evidence suggesting they were the first Pokemon ever designed. So, yeah, cool for them. Rhydon is a very tough Pokemon, with it being able to survive being submerged in lava and being shot at point-blank ranges with a cannon without ever getting a scratch. They're also smarter than Rhyhorn, but still forgetful though. They can also spin their horn like a drill, which can shatter diamond. Oh, and their tail can topple large buildings. So yeah, very tough cookies. When traded holding a protector, it evolves into Rhyperior. An unpopular opinion, but I actually kind of like Rhyperior's design. I don't know, I just feel like it kind of gets a bum rap, but I like it. Anyway, Rhyperior has holes in its hands that it fills with rocks so they can shoot them at enemies in order to sorry them before using their deadly horn attack. Oh yeah, also, females of this line have shorter horns. Other than that, not much to say here, so yeah, that's the Rhyhorn line. Let's move on to the next group. Chansey is a pink egg-shaped Pokemon that always has an egg in its pouch. Starting out as the baby Pokemon Happiny, during this stage they can't actually produce eggs yet, so as such they carry a rock in their pouch that they pretend is an egg. It also likes to lend this rock to friends, but it'll throw a tantrum if it's not returned. Also, I'm just now realizing that its pants are meant to make it look like an egg cup, so that's a cute detail that I've never noticed. When given an oval stone, they evolve into Chansey. Chansey is a sort of nurse Pokemon. Every day they lay an egg which is very nutrient rich. Chansey are known for giving these eggs to injured people or Pokemon, and it's said the more you bond with Chanseys, the more delicious the egg is. They're also implied to be an endangered species, as they're said to be very few in numbers. So that's sad. Why would you want to kill a Chansey? Now, Chanseys are most famous for their role in the anime, since their Chanseys are shown working at Pokemon centers where they help injured Pokemon. Super wholesome all around, I'd say. At high friendship, they evolve into Blissey, Pokemon that dedicate its life to making Pokemon happier. Its egg will improve the mood of anything that eats them, and it's able to detect sadness from a long way away. They will also nurse sick Pokemon back to health until they're healthy. Wasn't that a feel-good line? These are like the most wholesome Pokemon in existence. And that's just adorable. Pangala is a mess of vines surrounding an unknown black figure. Notably, in Gen 1, Pangala was the only pure grass type. It was also very overshadowed and weirdly difficult to find, only having a rare encounter on a patch of land you probably don't even go to. Pangala is coated in vines that make its identity impossible to see. They also jiggle these vines in a way that unnerves their opponent. In addition, they never stop growing, and they're used to wrap nearly everything they come across in a mass of plant matter. So, yeah. When leveled up knowing the move Ancient Power, they evolve into Tangrowth, a pile of vines, now with arms, that can instantly grow back if hacked off. Also, they're carnivore, so that's fun. They can also stretch these arms to catch prey, which is even more fun. Also, female Tangrowth have more red on their hands, which is probably the stupidest dimorphism I've ever seen. Yeah, I'm done talking about these guys, they're just piles of vines. Kangaskhan is a dinosaurian kangaroo. This line is entirely female and they always carry a baby in their pouch, even when they just hatch, oddly enough. Kangaskhan are very good mothers, only letting the baby out of their pouch when it's completely safe, and if anything approaches the baby, then the mother will attack them,
and when attacked, the mother will never give up no matter how badly wounded she gets. In addition, Kangaskhan's will also raise babies of other species, including humans on some occasions. Now, while Kangaskhan doesn't have any evolutions or other forms, it does have a Mega Evolution, which, while it doesn't affect the mother, it does turn the baby into a fighting machine. In fact, all the baby knows is fighting, which makes the mother concerned about its future. So way to go, you monster. Anyway, Mega Kangaskhan is infamously broken, as its main gimmick is that since there are two attackers, then most moves will be performed twice. Yes, really. As you can imagine, this is a very OP ability, and as such, most tournaments have banned Mega Kangaskhan. So way to go, Mamoru, you got banned. Moving on. The Horsea line is based on both seahorses and sea dragons, as well as inheriting traits of other aquatic species. For example, Horsea is said to shoot prey out of the air like archerfish while also spraying ink as a defense, like cephalopods do. But like seahorses, they're not very fast swimmers, so as to not get drifted off by the current, they wrap their tails around heavy objects in order to anchor themselves. At level 32, they evolve into Seadra, who is just a spikier seahorse. It's stated that like real seahorses, the males of the species raise the young. Also, they create whirlpools in order to get prey, and these pools sometimes break fishing boats. So that's fun. It's also stated they have poisonous bars, but they don't even learn any poison-type moves. And no, Toxic doesn't count since every Pokemon can learn Toxic. For some reason. Also, their bones are used in medicine, similar to real seahorses' bones. Anyway, in Gen 1, this line is pretty forgettable since Kanto had plenty of water types and, there was nothing special about this line. But then in Gen 2, it received a new evolution that changed everything. When Seadra is traded holding a dragon scale, they evolve into Kingdra. Gaining the Dragon type, Kingdra is a complete game changer and became very common and competitive, thanks to its type making it hard to get the advantage over. Since the Dragon type neutralizes water's weakness to grass and electric, while water neutralizes Dragon's weakness to ice. As such, before Fairy was introduced, they were only weak to Dragon type attacks. So yeah, pretty hard Pokemon to take down. Even in the Pokedex, this thing is treated like a sea monster, as it's said that when they yawn, they create whirlpools, live at depths that would crush most life forms, and in fact, this Pokemon is only awake during storms. Also, their scales are given to royalty as gifts, but, that's not as impressive. So yeah, from nobody to nightmare. Did I say that already? I don't care. Goldeen is a goldfish of the color of a koi that has a horn on its head. Yeah, not much to say here. As all their Pokedex entries just mention that it swims gracefully and their horn is dangerous. So, that's it. At level 33, they evolve into Sea King. Literally every single one of its Pokedex entries just mentioned how it reproduced in rivers during the fall where it makes its nest of its horns. Speaking of, in this line, females have shorter horns than males, so that's a thing. So yeah, pretty nothing line, and if it weren't for the Super Smash Bros. Series deciding to make Goldeen a joke character, I don't think anyone would even remember that these guys exist. Staryu is a starfish with a large red gem on its chest. Staryu has amazing regenerative abilities since as long as the gem isn't hurt, they can grow back to their full shape, even if they get hacked into pieces. Speaking of the gem, Staryu has the curious behavior of floating to the surface of water at night and blinking the light of its gem towards the sky, as if they're communicating with the stars. Strange indeed. When given a water stone, they evolve into Starmie. Now possessing the psychic type, Starmie swims by spinning its back half like a propeller. And if you thought Staryu's behavior was odd, Starmie not only blinks its light, but also sends radio signals towards the sky, which leads to a very high likelihood that these guys are actually aliens. So yeah, starfish aliens. Neat. Mr. Mime. Actually, how do you even describe Mr. Mime? This is one of the most bizarre ideas for a Pokemon. They decide to make a Pokemon that's a clown mime thing, and not even just an animal with that aesthetic, just a guy. And people give newer games crap for their character design. How do you justify this? Anyways, enough dunking on them. Let's give them the old analysis. This line starts with Mime Jr., a baby Pokemon that loves imitating things. They often hang out in urban environments, and as a defense mechanism, they will copy their enemies' movements to confuse them so they can make their getaway. When they know the move Mimic, they will evolve into Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime's psychic powers manifest as the ability to create invisible objects by manipulating the molecules in the air to make solid but unseeable objects. They often perform as entertainers, and if their act is interrupted or someone isn't impressed, then Mr. Mime will slap him in the face. So that's kinda harsh. In the Galar region, Mr. Mimes, for some reason Mime Juniors didn't get a regional form, but oh well, they have changed from psychic fairies to ice psychics. Now based on tap dancers, these Pokemon are able to alter the temperature of the floor in order to make floors of ice. In addition to a new form, Mr. Mime also gained an evolution in this region, Mr. Rhyme, a Pokemon based on silent film stars. It's a very entertaining Pokemon that waves its icy cane around when it dances and has psychic energy is stored in the stomach. So yeah, very interesting line regardless of how strange in concept they are. Scyther is the perfect example of how a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon had cool designs but weren't the best in battle. And no, I don't consider him a boss when you unlock him as a character because unlike Onyx, there is no Scyther that's hard to beat if you picked a certain starter. Actually, come to think of it, I don't think you're ever required to fight a Scyther at any point in Gen 1. Anyway, Scyther is a praying mantis mixed with a raptor. Scyther is described as being very fast and ninja-like, jumping out of tall grass and slicing their prey so they can eat them. They're so fast they can create the illusion that there's multiple of them. That's what I said at the beginning of the segment. In Generation 1, Scyther did not really have much it could do in battle. It didn't have a single good bug-type move, and its best flying move had very pitiful power. Combine this with how generally useless Bug was in Gen 1, and Scyther wasn't really that useful. Luckily, much like Onyx, Gen 2 would give Scyther an evolution that would change its reputation, and, humorously enough, they even evolved the same item, the Steel Coat. When traded with it, Scythers will evolve into Scizor, replacing its Scythe with Claws and replacing Flying type with Steel. Now, granted, Scizor has basically the same stats as Scyther, but the Steel type really helped. Sadly though, in Gen 2 there were still no good bug moves, with one exception, but even then that could only be used by one Pokemon. Luckily though, this line eventually actually became unironically good when later gens introduced better bug moves, making the type actually viable in the metagame. Okay, enough about meta, let's get back to Scizor. Scizors have fake eyes on their claws, which are often mistaken for the real deal by Pokemon that don't know better, causing them to think that this Pokemon has 3 heads. However, it's implied they overheat pretty fast, since it said they have to regularly flap their wings in order to cool down. By the way, I just need to vent. It's a common joke in the Pokemon fandom of, why can't Scyther fly? And to that, I say, if you just read the Pokedex, you'll see that it literally says that neither Scyther nor Scizor actually use their wings to fly. So take that, lazy parodies, I just destroyed your joke. Scizor can also Mega Evolve, where its claws are now replaced with larger claws that I honestly thought were supposed to be staplers when I first saw them. Yeah, that's not a joke. I was an idiot. Its larger claws, this form makes them incredibly vicious. Anything it comes across, it'll tear it to shreds. Sadly though, all the energy causes Scizor to be slowly melting, so enjoy your OP bug while it lasts, you monster. Also, female Scythers and Scizors have large abdomen. I think we all know what that implies, so I'm just going to move on. In the past, Scyther had another evolution known as Cleaver, which it evolves into when exposed to a substance known as black augurite? I don't know how to pronounce that. This evolution replaces the size of axe, and the flying is replaced with rock type. They're known to be pretty aggressive and use their hatchets to slice down trees, presumably to find bugs or something like that. Since the substance needed to evolve Cleaver isn't found in the present, I'm just gonna headcanon they were destroyed in some horrific event, possibly related to the event that wiped out the Growliths in this region. You can't change my mind about this, don't even try. Oh, that was a pretty fun Pokemon. What's next? Oh no. Oh boy. This is Jinx, an all-female line that highly resemble humans. This family starts with Smoochum, a tiny humanoid wearing a sweater. Smoochum's lips are very sensitive, and they're used to test objects to see what they are. Smoochum has perfect memories when it comes to what it has and hasn't kissed. They also use tree sap as chapstick. They make sure to keep their lips clean, as if they even get slightly dirty, they will wash them until they're as clean as a whistle. However, they really don't care if any other part of them is dirty, so they're not like neat freaks or something like that. At level 30, they evolve into Jinx. Jinx is a Pokemon resembling a human woman. These Pokemon are said to be lightly hypnotic, as when they dance, others are compelled to dance with them. They also speak a language which is described as sounding similar to a human language, but no one can understand it. Also, it said they have fan bases, so that's nice, I guess. Okay, now that we got their biology out of the way, let's address the elephant in the room when it comes to Jinx. I didn't want to have to talk about this, but not doing so would feel very disingenuous, considering that this controversy is what Jinx is most known for. So before we continue, content warning, blackface. In Generation 1, Jinx had pure black skin. Combine this with the large lips and it caused Jinx to bear a resemblance to a blackface performer, which, if you don't know, was a form of entertainment that involved a white person painting their skin black, giving themselves big red lips, and acting like a stereotypical black person. As you can imagine, this was pretty much declared a huge no-no after the Civil Rights Movement, so as such, when Pokemon first came out, Jinx drew a lot of negative attention due to its very unfortunate resemblance to such caricatures. Now, there's a whole lot of discourse surrounding designs like this in Japanese media, and Jinx isn't even the first time something like this has happened, since a similar controversy happened with the Dragon Ball franchise. And to be fair to Pokemon, there have been other theories for Jinx's origins that don't involve blackface, such as them being based on how Valkyries are portrayed in operas due to their golden breastplates and ice type. Others say they're based on the Norse goddess Hel due to her living in a realm covered in ice and possessing a face that's sometimes described as being half black. And some say that it's based on a Japanese style that involves tanning and bleaching your hair. But this has been disputed as that style didn't become popular until after the original Pokemon games were well into development. Regardless of origins, Jinx faced heavy amounts of criticism, causing a ripple effect throughout the franchise. Later games and anime episodes would change Jinx's skin color to purple, anime episodes featuring the original skin color were banned, and in general, Jinx has been kept on the down low, rarely featuring in the anime anymore, and not being given anything noteworthy in the games, unlike its two counterparts that we'll get to in a minute. Now, since I'm not black, I don't think I'm in a position to tell you one way or another if Jinx is racist or not, so I'll let you come to your own conclusions and make your own opinions. Wow, this was a heavy segment. Let's move on to something lighter. The Electabuzz line is a group of creatures that look like they came out of a Dr. Seuss book. Starting with Elekid, this guy is basically a mammalian plug. Elekid is able to generate electricity by waving its arms around like a windmill. Unfortunately, they have poor stamina, so they can't do this for long. The electricity flows between the plugs, meaning that if you put your hand between them, you get zapped. Also, the games keep flip-flopping on if they can store electricity or not, so that's a thing. Oh, and they suck on outlets like milk bottles in order to feed. At level 30, they evolve into Electabuzz, a Pokemon that targets power plants in order to feed. Because of this, most plants are guarded by ground types to keep them away. It's said that if a blackout occurs, then Electabuzz is to blame. However, later games reveal that this is actually a lie spread by plants in order to hide their own errors. So, basically a cover-up. In addition, Electabuzz communicate by zapping each other, which allows them to understand their feelings, so that's kinda cute, I guess. When traded holding the Electrizer item, they evolve into Electivire. Now possessing a pair of wires for tails, these bad boys can inject anything they touch with 20,000 watts of electricity, burning most things to a crisp. They'll also grab these tails to electrify their fists for lightning punches, and they could light an entire city for a year. Come to think of it, do you think in the Pokemon world electric Pokemon are like a life hack to how to not get any bills? Maybe. Magmar is a flaming blue-footed booby. Yes, those birds are what they're supposed to be based on. Which would explain why the Japanese names of this line all begin with the word boob, so there's that. Starting as Magby, this little guy can spit flames at over 1,000 degrees. Their health can also be determined by these flames, as if it's pure yellow, that's healthy. But if there's smoke, something's wrong. Oh yeah, and their blood is literally lava, so keep them away from your couch. At level 30, they evolve into Magmar. Now, with a double temperature, this Pokemon is so hot that much like the sun, it can be hard to look at them directly. Oh yeah, and they use magma pools as hot tubs when they need to relax. They also use their flames to hunt, but they often end up burning their food to an inedible crisp, so that's a drawback. When traded holding a Magmaizer, they evolve into Magmortar. Now with an additional 1,000 degrees, Magmortar glows white when looked at directly. They also possess an organ said to resemble a magma chamber in a volcano. Some steel plants even use them to melt metal, so good for them, I guess. Now you might have noticed that the previous three Pokemon all had notable similarities. For one, they have the same types as Gen 1's legendary trio, they're all humanoid, and in Gen 2 they all receive baby Pokemon that evolve at level 30. This leads many to believe that Jynx, Electabuzz, and Magmar were meant to be a trio of some sort, and that there might be some sort of lore that come out of them. Unfortunately, due to the Jynx controversy, any potential plans for this were likely scrapped. But even to this day, Magmar and Electabuzz can still be considered a duo, as they both got evolutions that evolve with very similar items. Just makes you wonder if Jynx would have gotten such an evolution too if it never got backlash. Just something to think about. Like Scyther, Pinsir is a Pokemon with a cool design who was sadly held back by being a bug type in Gen 1. Pinsir is a stag beetle with two deadly pinchers on its head. To eat, they grab prey and squeeze them until it's split in half, and if their prey proves to be too strong, they slam it around until it breaks. They also hate the cold and will hibernate during times of low temperatures. They're also strong, being able to lift objects twice their weight. As stated before, Scyther had a similar problem as Pinsir, being a bug type in a generation where bug types were garbage. And unlike Scyther, Pinsir didn't get an evolution to improve it. And even when better bug type moves came out, Pinsir was overshadowed by both Scyther and another beetle-based Pokemon who I'll talk about when we get to Johto. As such, Pinsir didn't have the same breakout as Scyther, being left to wallow in its shadow forever. Or at least until Gen 6 when it received a Mega Evolution. In this form, Pinsir can lift 10 times its weight, and most importantly, it gained a pair of wings. Yeah, surprisingly, making it one of the most cliched type matchups actually helped Pinsir stand out more. At least that's what I would say if it weren't for how the other bugs that upstaged it also got Mega Evolutions. So, whoops! R.I.P. Pinsir, you could have been cool, but you massively got overshadowed. Tragic.
Details. These Pokemon are very violent, charging at anything that bothers them. And unlike the forgetful Rhyhorn, Tauros will never stop charging until whatever bothered it is nothing but a pancake. Did I use that analogy already? I don't care. Tauros are herd Pokemon that are led by the most experienced member. You can usually identify the leader because they have longer hair and scars from years of battling. Now, Tauros is an all-male line. However, in Gen 2 we were introduced to the Pokemon Miltank, which are basically all but stated to be the females of this species. Miltank is a cow famous for its highly nutritious milk, which, interestingly enough, is always being produced even when they've never even had an offspring. Although being around young makes its milk more nutritious, so take that for what you will. Regardless, one Miltank can produce 5 gallons of milk in a day, and will even share this milk with sick Pokemon. So that's a thing. Now, even though it's never been officially stated in lore that Miltank and Tauros are the same species, there are hints towards it, such as how Tauros is a bull and Miltank is a cow. They have the same page on the Pokedex in Sun and Moon, which is usually only done for Pokemon that are related, and they have the same total stat number. So yeah, I'm talking about Miltank here. In the Paldea region, Tauros have been bred to be more combat-oriented, and as such, this region includes 3 unique breeds. There's the combat breed, which is a pure fighting type, and is described as having thick muscles that are adapted to close-quarter combat. The Blaze breed, which is part fire type, which has incredibly hot breath and the ability to store heat in its horns. And the Aqua breed, which is water fighting. They're incredibly buoyant thanks to their high fat level, and they shoot water out of their horns. So yeah, Pokemon cows are not to be messed with. Poor pathetic Magikarp. This fish is famous for being, to quote its theme song, totally pathetic, unreliable, known throughout the world for being super weak. Magikarp has some of the worst stats of all Pokemon, and in addition, until level 15 it only has one move, which is Splash. A move that literally does nothing. And even at level 15, all it gets is the move Tackle, which is one of the weakest moves in the game. Magikarp are a very common species, being found in basically every single body of water. They're so hardy that they've even been found thriving in extremely polluted water. Oh yeah, they can even splash over mountains, but it still doesn't even hurt. They're also very low on the food chain, as nearly every carnivorous Pokemon eats them. So yeah, poor little fish. However, when they reach level 20, they reveal a big secret. They evolve into Gyarados, the Piscine Dragon. Well, I say dragon, but it's not dragon type. Now, you might be wondering why a fish evolves into a dragon, and the answer is pretty simple. See, this line is based on the Chinese legend regarding a waterfall. It's said that if a carp manages to reach the top of a waterfall with a dragon gate on top, then the carp will turn into a dragon, and that's what this line is based on. Gyarados is the polar opposite of Magikarp. While Magikarp is completely useless and pathetic with a low move pool, Gyarados has a huge move pool and far, far better stats, and calling it pathetic is a good way to die. Gyarados is extremely aggressive, not being satisfied until everything around it is a pile of rubble. It's said they're responsible for the destruction of many cities, and as such, they are very feared Pokemon. Luckily, since Magikarp is so low on the food chain, many of them die before they can evolve, making Gyarados a pretty rare sight in the wild. Gyarados can also Mega Evolve. In this form, its flying is replaced with Dark, and they're even more aggressive, since now literally the only thought they have is destroy anything they see. So yeah, don't mess with Gyarados unless you have an electric type. Then these things are just as useless as Magikarp. Also, females of this line have white whiskers, so that's a thing. Lapras is a Pokemon based on the Loch Ness Monster. This icy reptile is a very docile and friendly Pokemon, often used by people to cross large bodies of water. In addition, despite not being psychic, they can read minds. Sadly, though, their docile nature made them a popular hunting target, and their numbers quickly went down. It's said that Lapras would often sing songs of sorrow at night in an attempt to find the remaining members of its species. Luckily, though, by the time of Gen 7, conservation efforts have been successful, so not only have their numbers rised, but much like the American alligator, there's now an overabundance of them. While it doesn't evolve into anything, Lapras does have a G-Max form. Now resembling a boat, G-Max Lapras can seat over 5,000 people, and it swims incredibly smoothly, never once shaking or swaying. So yeah, this Pokemon recovered from near extinction. That's so sweet. Ditto is a purple slime creature. The main gimmick of this guy is the fact that they're shapeshifters, being capable of manipulating their body into resembling anything it sees. And it's not just an aesthetic change either, as Ditto actually restructures its own DNA to make itself a carbon copy of its target, inheriting its type and moves. Also, they turn into rocks when they sleep so they don't get eaten by predators. Now, one weakness of Ditto is that they can't hold their form when they laugh, and they have a hard time transforming based on memory. If they do that, then they'll look off. Oh, also, I need to address a common misconception about Ditto. A lot of people seem to think that when Ditto transforms, its face remains the same. However, this is never stated in any of the Pokedex entries, or in the games. There, it's always portrayed as a perfect carbon copy. Much like Charmander's tail, this misconception comes from the anime, as there was an episode featuring a Ditto who had that trait. But it should be noted that even in the episode, the fact that Ditto couldn't change its face was treated like an anomaly, and it ended up managing to get over that anyway, and managed to make perfect carbon copies. So yeah, another Poke myth busted. Thanks to Ditto's shapeshifting ability, they're able to reproduce with any Pokemon. In fact, for some of them, they can only breed with Ditto due to being genderless, making you wonder how they reproduce in the wild. Oh well, that's a can of worms I do not want to get into. Although amusingly enough, Dittos can't breed with other Dittos. So, how do they reproduce then? Oh, never mind, let's just move on. Ah, Eevee. This little fox thing is rather notable for being the first Pokemon of multiple evolutions. Since depending on your actions, Eevee has 8 possible forms it can evolve into. You see, Eevee has very unstable DNA, and as such, different environments or certain types of radiation will cause Eevee to mutate into a form that best suits the situation. In fact, it's said that after a while their face can start to look like their trainers. That is horrifying. Also, Eevee is one of 3 unevolved Pokemon to have a G-Max form. In this form, it's said to be super friendly, but it doesn't know its own strength. You can do the math. Well, that's enough about Eevee. Let's go through each of Eevee's evolutions and see what they bring to the table. If you give them a Water Stone, you get Vaporeon, a mermaid-like Pokemon. This evolution has a similar atomic structure to water, and as such, when it enters bodies like oceans and lakes, it'll convert into a pure liquid. They can also detect rain, and like Dugong, they were also mistaken for mermaids. If you give Eevee a Thunderstone, you get Jolteon, an electric type. In addition to possessing electricity capable of reaching 10,000 volts, Jolteon can also shoot its hairs, just like a tarantula. They're also a very moody species that is easily angered, so be careful if you decide to raise them. And if you give Eevee a Firestone, you'll get Flareon, a mon that shoots flames that can reach 3,000 degrees, and their bodies can reach temperatures of over 1,500 degrees. They also cook their food. Not much to say here. There's a reason Flareon's the least liked evolution. It's just kinda boring compared to the others. Next up, we got Espeon, which Eevee evolves into with max friendship at day. This psychic type is able to see the future, which helps it avoid dangerous moves. This is thanks to their very sensitive hairs, which can detect things like weather changes and even their opponent's thoughts. In addition, Espeon are said to be very loyal Pokemon, with it being theorized that this form came about in order to protect their trainers. How sweet. If you instead decide to max level Eevee's friendship at night, they will evolve into Umbreon, a dark type which has an ominous glow when exposed to moonlight that intimidates whatever looks at it. Their black fur also provides them camouflage when they hunt. In addition to its dark power, Umbreon is strangely also said to possess deadly poison despite not being a poison type, which has led several to believe that Umbreon was planned to be a poison type at first before it was decided that dark type would be more fitting, but that's just a theory. When leveled up near rocks covered in moss, Eevee will evolve into Leafeon. Leafeon are some of the most peaceful evolutions as they feed by photosynthesis, meaning they have no need to hunt. In addition, they rarely fight unless provoked. So yeah, peaceful Eevees. When leveled up near a rock covered in ice, Eevee will evolve into Glaceon, and there's not much to say here, as all of its dex entries just mention that it can self-harden itself, and it can create hail. So that's about it. Finally, if Eevee knows a fairy-type move and has two Hearts of Affection in the mode known as Pokemon Ami, then they'll evolve into Sylveon, a fairy type able to detect auras and manipulate feelings. Again, not much to say since the dex doesn't really give us much lore about them. So yeah, that's the Eevee line. Easy to see why they became so famous, because just look at the little Eevee, oh isn't it adorable, oh I just want to take it home with me. Porygon is a very interesting Pokemon. You see, this line is actually man-made AI, and some dex entries even claim they're the first ever man-made Pokemon, which is a claim that some later generations would dispute, but regardless, Porygon is a digital origami bird thing that is capable of entering computers and moving about through cyberspace. Porygon was also created in hopes of it being able to go to space, but that hasn't happened yet. A few years after its creation, an upgrade disc was released. That one Porygon is trading while holding, it'll upgrade into Porygon 2, a much smoother Pokemon that's rounded out as compared to Porygon's jagged edges. Now, personally, I don't see how it's very user-friendly to have to trade away a piece of technology in order to upgrade it, but whatever. Porygon 2's body was built for space travel, except that it can't even fly. Also, unlike Porygon, who only does things it's programmed to do, Porygon 2 is capable of learning things on its own, as well as remembering things it wasn't even supposed to remember. They've even developed their own language that's only understood by other Porygon 2s, which is actually based on a real phenomenon that occurs with AIs where they'll communicate with each other in a made-up language. So, yeah. Things are going great for these Pokemon, but then an unknown third-party company not affiliated with their creators released an item known as the Dubious Disc, that when Porygon 2 is traded holding with, it will turn into Porygon Z. Apparently, whoever made the disc tried to make Porygon capable of interdimensional travel, but it didn't work, and instead Porygon 2 became a very glitchy Pokemon that's always twitching and never seems to work right. A very sad tale of what happens when programmers become overly ambitious. One thing to note is that Porygon 2 and Z have never appeared in the proper anime. They've appeared in some music videos and intros of films, but in the show itself, nope, nada. Why is that, you might be wondering? Well, let me tell you a tale of one of the most controversial episodes in the history of television. On December 16th, 1997, an episode of the anime aired known as Electric Soldier Porygon. This episode was all about Porygon, and for the most part, it was just a fun venture through cyberspace. But the animators on the show got a little too trigger happy with the special effects. And as such, throughout the episode, rapid flashes of red and blue light would fill the screen, with the most infamous example of this being near the end, where there's a good 4 seconds where the screen is mostly flashing red and blue lights. As you can imagine, this caused issues, and over 600 kids ended up suffering from epileptic seizures. Now, some say the number is over exaggerated and some of the cases were a result of panic induced symptoms, but it's still not a very good look for a company to give kids seizures. This event, dubbed Pokemon Shock, quickly became known worldwide, and for a few years after this, pretty much all Pokemon parodies had to reference this incident. And keep in mind, this episode aired before Pokemon even left Japan, so not really the best impression. This episode had major consequences on the budding franchise. First off, the episode is banned by the Japanese government and is never allowed to air on TV again. Secondly, the show went on hiatus for a good few months while they worked out their animation techniques. Thirdly, older episodes were edited to darken or slow down scenes that featured bright flashes so that no similar incidents could happen. Fourthly, this incident pretty much caused the entire medium of anime to declare flashing lights a taboo. And finally, Porygon and its evolutions never appeared in the anime again. Even though Porygon didn't cause the lights, and that's kind of unfair. Okay, now as a disclaimer, I do not recommend seeking this episode out. I don't even have epilepsy, and yet clips from it still hurt to watch. So do not watch this episode, especially if you have epilepsy. Well, that's the Porygon line. From glitches to seizures, this is definitely a weird legacy. Ammonite is a blue ammonite. Resurrected from the Helix fossil, this squishy cephalopod swam through the seas of... Well, we're never given a time period, but since ammonites lived through the Mesozoic, that's what I'll be going with. They ate plankton and were capable of adjusting their buoyancy by filling and releasing air from their shells. Once revived, some specimens ended up escaping into the wild, and since their predators are long dead, they became an invasive species. At level 40, they evolve into Omastar, a Pokemon equipped with more tentacles, a terrifying mouth, and a spiked shell. While intimidating, this shell proved to be a massive issue, as it became incredibly slow and only able to feed on nearby prey. As such, they died out. Now, this is something that happens in real life too, where a species becomes so specialized that once the thing they specialize in goes away, the species dies out. So yeah, these guys basically embody natural selection. On a lighter note, this line is famous in the fandom thanks to the infamous Twitch Plays Pokemon Let's Play, where in this community-controlled game, people kept using the Helix fossil despite it not doing anything. This led to the joke that they were consulting it for advice, and thus the meme of Omanite being worshipped like a god was born, especially helped by the fact that you have to resurrect it, which makes the symbolism even greater. So yeah, praise the shell, or something. Resurrected from the dome fossil, Kabuto is like a hybrid between a trilobite and a horseshoe crab. Swimming in the oceans 300 million years ago, which was during the Carboniferous, these Pokemon have two sets of eyes, on top and beneath. Sadly though, we're never given any indication of their diet, just that they have a hard shell. Also, they're not actually extinct, as there are small populations found throughout the world, making them living fossils. At level 40, they evolve into Kabutops, which, notably, despite having a shell like an arthropod, possesses a skeleton like a vertebrae, which is weird. Kabutops came around due to how, during its time, life was starting to come onto land more, so Kabuto started morphing into Kabutops in order to follow them. Kabutops is a vicious predator, using the scythe on its hands to slice open prey and suck their juices out. They're also very fast, capable of slicing through the water at high speeds. So yeah, trilobite horseshoe crabs that suck blood. What's not to love? Well, except for the fact they don't have the same presence as Lord Helix, so you know what? They're actually garbage. Aerodactyl is a monstrous pterosaur resurrected from blood found in fossilized mosquitoes. During its time, Aerodactyl ruled over the skies, and very few other creatures would dare to face it. Since, unlike most pterosaurs, this guy was a big game hunter, going for the throats of whatever sorry Pokemon it targeted. Oh yeah, and it literally killed some of the scientists who first resurrected it. So yeah, not a pterosaur to be messed with. Though much like real pterosaurs, its reign came to an end when a giant meteor smacked into the earth, killing them all. At least until cloning technology was invented. Also, it's noted that the cloning technique used to resurrect Aerodactyl wasn't perfect, and as such, the Aerodactyl we see isn't actually the same one that lived all those years ago, which is an interesting thing to note. Aerodactyl got a Mega Evolution too, which is noted in the Pokedex to possibly be its true form. In this state, Aerodactyl possesses sharp spikes that are as hard as diamond, and an even more vicious appetite thanks to the pain caused by all the power it possesses. So that's fun. Also, there's actually a real life pterosaur genus named after the Pokemon. They're not as impressive, but it's still cool to have a real life animal with the name now. Snorlax is a giant bear thing. Starting out as Munchlax, this little guy spends all of its time eating. In fact, every day they eat their body weight in food, from plants to meat to even inanimate objects. If it looks edible, Munchlax will eat it. Which is thanks to their powerful stomach acid that can digest basically anything. Even the most rotten food or poison substance doesn't bother them. Also, fun fact, Munchlax was the first ever Gen 4 Pokemon to be revealed, being revealed in an episode of the anime that aired in 2004, 2 years before Gen 4 even came out. At high friendship, Munchlax will evolve into Snorlax, an absolutely giant Pokemon that spends all of its time eating or sleeping. When they eat, Snorlax still has the same powerful stomach acid, and they need to eat more than 800 pounds a day in order to be satisfied. Then they fall into a sleep so deep that only a specially designed flute can wake them up. Because of their massive eating habits, large groups of them can lead to famines, so they're kind of a pest. Snorlax are pretty peaceful creatures, though, even allowing children to bounce on its stomach like a trampoline. But when they do fight, they are a very powerful opponent thanks to their large bulk, so make sure you don't tick them off. Snorlax also has a Gigantamax form. In this form, its belly now has its own ecosystem and is just described as terrifyingly strong. Well, that's Snorlax, the sleeping Pokemon. Powerful, yet lazy. Legendary birds were the first legendary Pokemon that can be encountered. This trio consists of 3 birds of controls over different aspects of the weather. Unlike a lot of legendaries, these guys don't really have much lore to them. All that's known is that they possibly have a connection to the legendary known as Lugia. And I say possibly because a connection between them has only been stated in the anime and some spin-off games, never in the main series. So whether there's a canon connection or not is up for debate. As for the birds themselves, we start with the icy Arctic Uno. This beautiful bird has control over snow and is capable of creating massive blizzards. This is thanks to how their wings are made of ice, and so, whenever they fly, they end up freezing the air around them and creating snow. It's also said to appear to people who are lost in the mountains, but it's never said whether they come to rescue them or eat them, so, I'll let you come to your own conclusions. Then we got Zapdos. This bird is capable of creating massive thunderstorms by flapping its wings. In addition, like most electric types, they feed on pure energy. But in their case, they mostly get energy by getting struck by lightning bolts. In fact, they love lightning so much that they nest in thunder clouds. That's metal. Then we got Moltres, the firebird. When this Pokemon flaps its wings, it creates an aura of very hot flames that create embers that fall from the sky. It's said that when Moltres passes by an area covered in snow, then spring will come early, and when injured, they can dip themselves in magma to heal. Now at the beginning of this video, I used these birds as an example of legendaries there are multiple of, and that's because not only have there been games where you can catch more than one of them, but in addition, they also have regional forms. In the Galar region, each of these birds have had a type change. Articuno is now a psychic type who is able to convince their foes that they're frozen despite there being no change in their actual temperature. Zapdos is now a fighting type based on Roadrunners who has powerful legs that can run nearly 200 miles an hour. And Moltres is now a dark type whose dark flames burn the spirit of wherever they hit. That is terrifying. Now, the fact that there are not only multiple legendary birds but also regional forms of them raises a lot of questions as to what exactly qualifies something as a legendary. But then again, maybe legendary Pokemon that are species could be considered to be similar to angels or Valkyries, being powerful beings that are not mortal but they're not gods either. Actually, yeah, I like that theory. That's my headcanon now. Well, those were the first legendaries. Not a bad start. The Dratini line provides us with the first example of a pseudo-legendary, which are Pokemon that are very powerful but are not officially considered legendary Pokemon. Most of them are Dragon type, they're usually at the end of the region's Pokedex, and they always have a 3-stage evolution. And to start out this lineage of faux legendaries, we have Dratini, a serpentine dragon that was long considered a myth until colonies of them were discovered living in rivers. Despite not being a water type, Dratini spends most of its time in the water, usually near falls, so that nothing will come near them. And much like snakes, they shed their skin in order to grow. At level 30, they evolve into Dragonair, a much more slender dragon covered in pearls that give it the ability to control the weather. Dragonairs also have a mystical aura to them and are often worshipped due to their weather controlling capabilities. Then at level 55, they evolve into Dragonite, a Pokemon that, despite its immense power, is actually very friendly, often helping out people who are lost at sea. There are rarely seen Pokemon due to them living on deserted islands that only they inhabit, though. They're also a very fast Pokemon, being capable of flying around the globe in just 16 hours. So yeah, very elegant and kind-hearted. Not a bad start to the pseudo-legendary trend. Mewtwo is a very fascinating Pokemon. You see, they're the first Pokemon that has a concrete backstory. In the original games, there's a place called the Pokemon Mansion, which contains journals detailing the creation of this creature. In the jungles of Guyana, South America, a research expedition found the incredibly rare Pokemon Mew. This was a very fascinating discovery for the scientists who started experimenting with the rare creature. Turns out, Mew was pregnant, and when it gave birth, the baby was put through horrific gene slicing experiments. These experiments made the baby both incredibly powerful but also extremely aggressive. Eventually, it destroyed the lab and fled into the wild, where it now resides deep in a cave, away from humanity. Because of its background, Mewtwo only thinks about fighting and is said to possess the most savage heart of all Pokemon. Notably, until Gen 4, Mewtwo was the strongest Pokemon in terms of stats, and it literally took God himself to overthrow that position. But then in Gen 6, Mewtwo got Mega Evolutions and once again shot itself to the top. First, there's Mega Mewtwo X, which is Psychic Fighting type, thanks to Mewtwo augmenting its muscles using its mind. Then there's Mega Mewtwo Y, which despite being smaller in size, has far greater psychic powers, which allows it to destroy anything of just a thought. So yeah, Mewtwo, the terrifying yet tragic Pokemon. And finally, we got the elusive Mew. Very few people have seen this Pokemon, which is helped by its invisibility powers and its ability to shapeshift. But the thing that makes Mew most interesting is the fact that they contain the DNA of every non-legendary Pokemon, implying that they're the common ancestor of all life on the Pokemon Earth. Because of its DNA, Mew is capable of learning almost every move in the game, making it a very versatile Pokemon. And now for a meta fact, Mew was actually programmed into the game at the last minute, with very few people at Nintendo even knowing about its existence. See, originally, Mew was only mentioned in Mewtwo's backstory and didn't even have a design. But, since there was just enough space left on the cartridge, someone decided to throw Mew into the game. When word of this Pokemon spread, everyone and their grandma started spreading reports of how to obtain it, since it seemed like it wasn't anywhere in the game no matter where you looked. A lot of rumors came out about how to catch this elusive Pokemon, such as collecting every Pokemon in the game, or looking under a truck that seemed to serve no other purpose. But no matter what people did, there was no Mew to be found. This is because Mew was never actually programmed to appear in the game. Its data was in the game, but at no point in the game is there ever a situation where its data is brought out. So, yeah. Eventually, though, there were events where you could take your copy of the game to a toy store where they would give you a Mew, and there was eventually a glitch that was discovered that would allow you to catch Mew by manipulating the game's mapping and battling system. To this day, Mew has never been able to be found without real-world events, and that is something that'll likely never change. Well, there you have it. All 151 Gen 1 Pokemon, plus their evolutions and pre-evolutions from later generations. Join me next time when I look at Gen 2, which, thankfully for me, is a lot less to look at since I tackled a good chunk of Gen 2 Pokemon in this video already. So, also good news for you, since that means the video will be out a lot sooner than this one was. Well, until next time, I've been Mr. G, thanks for watching, and goodbye.